Having said that, we've been anticipating for a long time. We've wondered why it's been so relatively quiet. The suggestions of Osama bin Laden's involvement. What has he been doing since Cole? Other groups out there with a real or imagined grudge against the United States. The nature of the event is shocking. The fact that it's happened is not.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Really appreciate it. Kyle Olson.
Yeah, one quick thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
One quick thing. The suggestions that are floating around out there right now. There's apparently this claim from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
Right.
Very interesting to note. If this is legitimate, if this claim stands up, this appears to be the first time this group has targeted Americans. This group has primarily steered away from the more extreme end of the violence scale. They focused less on suicide bombings, more on gun attacks and that sort of thing in the territories against Israelis.
Well,
if this holds up, this is a very different tactic.
Well, if it is true, and of course the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine was very much involved in attacking aircraft in the 1970s, which carried Americans. So certainly let's accept your notion that it's a recent attack on Americans. Thank you, Kyle, very much.
You bet.
As Mr. Olson makes clear, there has been at least one claim, and those of us who cover this for a very long period of time are always suspicious of claims. People who cover international terrorism. I'm going to interrupt myself. Linda Douglas, our Capitol Hill correspondent, I think is on the phone.
Those guys were a lot closer to the collapse than we were.
Hey, Rick, they've been going live with you the whole time.
All right. Again, just to bring up the speed, we're on Church Street, just about 5 blocks from the World Trade Center. And we were standing here when there was some sort of collapse or explosion, and everyone started running in this direction. Police officers, pedestrians, EMTs, everybody came running this way. I saw a woman pushing a baby carriage, running for her life, and right behind them was a huge cloud of billowing smoke and ash and debris coming this way. The smoke is obviously cleared somewhat. Ma'am, she's with DCPI. Can you talk to us for just a second? Bring us up to speed. Obviously, people have their hands full out here. It's not easy getting anyone to talk. Yeah, tell me where you were. What happened? What did you see? What did you hear?
First, I went on Canal Street. I saw the fire. I saw the 2 buildings. I'm thinking it was a bomb because it's 2 of them. Anyway, when I got there, I tried to save people because I'm a doctor. When I tried to save people, in the moment we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. People got hurt. Stuff went on top of them. And it was a big explosion, and everything got dark, real dark, like snow. You can see behind me, oh, this is not snow. This is all from the building. It was a terrible nightmare.
Where exactly were you standing when this happened?
I was standing right in front of the World Trade Center.
So you were down the block here? And
right
you
there
came
in the
running
middle.
this way?
Right, yeah.
Did you get hurt at all?
No, not me.
Did you see anyone around you getting caught up in it?
Yeah, I was with the firemen.
There was 3 explosions. So now the exchange is keeping everyone inside. I'm on the floor with about, 100, 200 people right here, and we're just waiting. That's all I can tell you. It's pitch black outside. There's soot falling from the sky. I don't know if you could see my jacket and my shoes, but I'm completely covered in white smoke from the explosion, from that 3rd explosion.
Maria, do you know what that explosion was?
That was about I'd say 15 minutes ago.
But do you know what caused it?
No, I don't.
At the moment, Maria, and for the benefit of the people with you, at the moment there were eyewitnesses who feel that another plane,
yes,
a 3rd plane,
that's what some people are saying. Now,
hit the base of the South Tower.
I was under the impression that it was just the actual collapse of the building, but some people are speculating that. I mean, I didn't want to say that because...
No, we had, at the moment it happened, we had MSNBC speed up, and we could hear people shouting, a 3rd plane, and then there was an explosion, another plane, and then there was an explosion.
That's right. And I was outside during that explosion. Immediately, we all ran. I was running backwards to see if I could see anything. We all went under. There was a little stairwell to go under a building. About 20 of us went under there, and we were
side of the South Tower
Trade Center, many of them with tears in their eyes, many telling stories, and some just downright distraught and screaming as they just try and get as far away from the scene as they possibly can. The closer you get to the scene, the more you see what can only be described as carnage by many of those even hardened investigators, hardened police officers that we have had a chance to talk to. Moments ago, we got off the only way to most access, by the way, has been shut down to this area. All the subways and all the other transit has been shut down to this area. We came in by by essentially asking someone to drive us into this area, and we've just gotten off moments ago. We're off of Canal Street as we start to talk to some of the people in this area who, Lester, can only be described as being in shock right now.
Rick, we know it's very difficult for folks to get calls into and out of Manhattan. I was able to fortunately speak to my wife, who was dropping the kids not too far from the World Trade Center for school. They are okay, but we can imagine folks watching these pictures that we've been seeing, wondering about their loved ones and having great difficulty getting phone calls in and out.
All I can tell you right now, as far as that is concerned, Lester, I talked to one police officer, and they say what they're going to try and do is just evacuate the area, get people out of this area as soon as they possibly can. Their next step is to somehow try and cordon off or close the roads, but they really haven't had a chance to do that because they're dealing with the buildings themselves at this point. I am told that most of the schools and most of the buildings in this area, even within like a 10-block radius, have also been closed, and people are being told.
about 5 minutes.
And Kate, you again, how far away from the Capitol building itself?
I'm standing on...
This is the aftermath of a horrific event that began unfolding about an hour and 20 minutes ago. A jet plane slammed into the side of Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. Then a few minutes later, another jet slammed into Tower 1. The second Tower 1, I should say, the upper floors have collapsed. They're absolutely gone.
I was in the restroom. There was a big shaking. Some of the ceilings collapsed. Looks like there was a fire in the elevator shafts, and they brought everyone down and started bringing everybody down the stairs.
So you came down from the 77th floor.
77th floor, down the stairs.
Down the stairs.
Yes.
What was happening around you? People screaming?
No, people were pretty calm. When we got down to 6th floor, there was like another shake or another explosion. Everyone started panicking, but everybody was really calm, and the police and firemen were very helpful.
Which of the two towers were you in?
One, Trade Center 1.
All right. And when you got to the ground, then what?
It's just like, it's like rubble and dust, like inches thick, and like paper everywhere, and they just moved us out.
How many people do you think were in the building on the floors that were affected? What do you think?
I mean, I'm one office out of 20 on that floor, so I have no idea.
How far above you or below you was the impact?
I think it was above us. I don't know how many floors. We saw it on TV, but I don't know.
What's the first thing you thought when you heard it?
Had to call my wife.
Did you? Were you able to?
Yeah, I got through a phone line. I called her. I'm talking to you because I'm hoping she's watching so she knows I'm okay.
What's your name?
My name is Matthew Gard.
Folks, clearly America is under attack. We can only hope that it's over, at least for now. Our David Schuster is in Washington, where there have been one, perhaps two explosions at the Pentagon. David, what can you tell us?
John, I'm actually in our office here at the Pentagon, and according to counterintelligence sources, they confirmed that it was a plane that crashed into the south end of the Pentagon near the helipad. This is a route that commercial aircraft flying into national air.
In the Capitol are you now?
Well, Aaron, I'm in our bureau, but I have on the telephone with me Barbara, who is the wife of a friend of mine and who is an eyewitness to exactly what happened at the Pentagon. Barbara, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, what exactly did you see? Let's look at the Pentagon now as you describe what exactly happened at the Pentagon this morning.
As we were driving into town on 395, there was an exit. We were trying to get off the exit for the Memorial Bridge. Off to the left-hand side was a commercial plane that came in and was coming too fast and too low. And the next thing we saw was it go down below the side of the road and we just saw the fire that came up after that.
You much more in terms of specific information other than to say that there are probably at this stage, I would say, hundreds, perhaps in the thousands of emergency workers who in the last hour and a half have managed to work their way down here to lower Manhattan and basically try to get into this fray. We are standing right here about 10 to 12 blocks north of the World Trade Center. These firemen that you can see, firefighters are walking down towards the site now, and they literally have been arriving by the dozens over the past hour or so. As we say, probably in excess of 1,000 or more emergency workers from New York City and surrounding areas converging on this site now to try to make some sense of it. As you can imagine, at this point there is a certain level of chaos because they're just trying to sort out who's alive, who's not. We did speak to, as I said before, some of the emergency workers. They are police officers from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. That is the organization that has jurisdiction over those two buildings specifically, as well as bridges and tunnels. I spoke to two of them who were actually down there when that building collapsed. They said that they speculate that the loss of life had to be horrific, that there were not that many people down there on the streets at that point, that most of them who had been evacuated, that is civilians. But on the other hand, they said that there were literally hundreds of emergency workers who were down at that end. They have no idea the level of loss of life at this point. When I asked one of them why he was going back in as he suited up since he could barely breathe, he said, "It's my job, and there may be some of my brother officers in there. There may be other people in there." So those officers going in here, as you can see, all kinds of fire workers going in there, literally in the thousands now converging on this site. We cannot give you much of an organizational sense beyond telling you probably what you already know, which is that two separate aircraft have struck the two towers of the World Trade Center. If memory serves, I think each of those towers stands 110 stories. Some of the dust, as you can probably see now, is blowing in our faces. It just really depends on which way the wind blows as to whether or not we're enveloped in some of the dust and the smoke. As you can see from these pictures, the amount of dust from the fire that's still burning, flames and ash, is extraordinary at this point. And at least a few emergency workers have said that they really aren't so sure that other tower won't stay up now. They really didn't think the first one was capable of coming down, but it did. And so they're basically saying, keep back as far as you can. On the other hand, facing that danger, as we have been telling you, many, many hundreds of these workers are heading over those lines down towards that burning building to try to rescue those people who are in there, be they emergency workers, be they civilians. The original crash took place just about 8:45 by my reckoning. I don't know the exact time, but about 8:45. And when that took place, obviously at that hour the building would not be packed with people, but it's still late enough in the morning that there would be enough people on those floors that the loss of life and certainly the injuries would likely be extraordinary. What you are looking at now is a close-up of the enormous hole in the side of that building. That is exactly what happens when a plane hits the side of the World Trade Center. The only time that we really have any kind of comparative experience as to how to do this, rather how to compare it to, I suppose, is in 1945, a B-25, an Army B-25, just at the end of World War II, crashed into the Empire State Building, and that caused, obviously, a great deal of damage, but it happened at night, so the loss of life was not that bad.
It's Pat Dawson reporting from outside the World Trade Center. You see the live picture, smoke continuing to billow from the upper floors. We have just received word that all inbound international flights to the United States are being diverted to Canada. The government will not allow them to land here in the U.S. They are being diverted to Canada. As we've been reporting, all airports in the U.S. have shut down departures. We were watching on our Flight Explorer. I don't know if we can put it on the air right now. This is a system in which we can actually look at the number of airplanes in the air. Normally this would be dotted with little blue airplane figures. Look at how few we're looking. It looks like only 3 over the immediate New York City metropolitan area, just a handful. handful. Airplanes in the air are being allowed to land at their destinations, and then that is it. Now, keep in mind, the planes you're looking at here are only those that are participating in the FAA radar system, airliners. This does not include anybody in a small Cessna or a small plane who might be flying what's called VFR traffic, where they're just flying below the commercial traffic. But again, these represent commercial airplanes or airplanes that are participating in the FAA system, just a handful in the skies over the Northeast right now. Greg, Chris?
Watching continuing NBC News coverage on MSNBC of a series of apparent terrorist attacks on the United States. First, 2 planes crashing into the upper floors of both World Trade Center towers in Lower Manhattan just minutes apart this morning. And again, what President Bush said was an apparent terrorist attack. Sometime later, Twin Tower number 1, World Trade Center number 1 as it is known, collapsed. Within the hour, an aircraft crashed into a helicopter landing pad near the Pentagon, and the west wing of the White House was evacuated, among other places. The Pentagon has been evacuated, the White House, the Capitol, the Sears Tower in Chicago, and you see the billowing smoke that continues to come out of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Joining us on the phone, Dr. Angelo Caprio. He is at St. Mary's Hospital in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is across the river from Manhattan. And doctor, as I understand it, well, let's go to WNBC coverage first.
State Department officials and the White House officials and the NSC have all been evacuated as well, although Condi Rice was earlier in the Situation Room, and CIA Director George Tenet has been holding meetings in his office in Langley, Virginia. And as we reported earlier, key FBI team members from their rescue efforts and anti-terror coordinating team were stranded in Monterey, California, where they were on a secret military exercise against exactly this kind of event.
Andy, let me interrupt for a second. Can you tell us any more about reports we're getting that a car bomb has exploded?
And so you heard NBC's Andrea Mitchell expanding the number of evacuations in Washington, D.C., the NSC and the State Department as well. As I told you, we have Dr. Angelo Caprio on the phone from St. Mary's Hospital in Hoboken, New Jersey. Doctor, I know it's extremely busy. What can you tell us about any casualties you're receiving there?
We're receiving some minor burns now. We have 3 emergency rooms in our hospital system, one here at St. Mary's, one at St. Francis, and one at Christ Hospital in Jersey City, and we're open and functioning to receive any casualties that we may get.
You are directly across the river from Midtown Manhattan. Have you ever in your experience gotten any of these types of casualties from New York? What kind of emergency plan is in place that would include New Jersey hospitals?
I don't know what kind of emergency plan they have in place. We have our external disaster plan in place. We've sent triage teams to the PATH station, Hoboken Terminal. And as I said, we have our 3 emergency rooms open and running.
Dr. Angelo Caprio, thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
From around the New York City metropolitan region, help is pouring in after the attack on the Twin Towers.
And we believe now the second tower of the World Trade Center, that would be tower number 2, has collapsed. This is a terrible, terrible tragedy. The first one collapsed just a short time ago. This now appears to be the second of the Twin Towers, having been struck, each of them, by a plane, has collapsed. Let's listen.
From the area. There are firefighters and there are police trying to evacuate the area as quickly as possible. People who are near the area are in an absolute frenzied situation. The entire top of the building just collapsed. You can see the plume of smoke is coming in our direction. Let's get out of here, Ralph. We're going to leave because the smoke is coming right at us.
Obviously, this is a devastating moment.
Look at this. The World Trade Center is no more.
We do not know at this point.
What has happened in Lower Manhattan, almost unfathomable. An apparent terrorist attack. 2 planes deliberately crashed, we believe, into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Now, these are pictures from just moments ago. Earlier, one World Trade Center collapse. Now you can see the collapse of the second tower. It is almost incomprehensible to believe that these 2 110-story towers, there you see it, just collapsing into the ground, are no longer part of the skyline of Manhattan. And there were huge numbers of emergency workers who were rushing to the scene to deal with the injured in that area from the first two initial explosions and then, of course, the collapse of the first of the World Trade Center towers. Now with the second collapse, here again is the tape just moments ago, the collapse of the World Trade Center Tower number 2.
These are 110 stories high, roughly 1,377-foot skyscrapers, two of the defining characteristics of the Manhattan skyline. They are no more, and one can scarcely comprehend the loss of life of all of the people who perhaps were not lucky enough to scramble out of these buildings when they were first attacked by hijacked planes shortly before 9 o'clock this morning in an apparent terrorist attack against America. And there you see the second tower coming down. The Twin Towers are gone now. And too, we should tell you, there is the Pentagon. The Pentagon was also struck by what we believe to be a hijacked plane. It has been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. The nation's Capitol building has been evacuated. Congressional leaders have reportedly been taken to a secure location. Here again is the number 2 tower of the World Trade Center come crashing down to the ground in a horrific scene of destruction wrought by a terrorist attack on America. Before that tower collapsed, an eyewitness said it had become so desperate that he saw people literally jumping out the windows of that tower to their death. When the initial plane attack occurred, another eyewitness said bodies were falling to the ground from the upper levels of this 110-story structure.
The scene that you are viewing is from the opposite side of the Hudson River. The Twin Towers sit on the lower end of Manhattan, virtually in the southernmost tip of Manhattan, not far off from where people are familiar with the Statue of Liberty. This is a highly populated area during the daytime. It is the Wall Street area of Manhattan, and this is the view from across the river in New Jersey. President George W. Bush called this a national tragedy. He said he had spoken to the director of the FBI and ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help victims and their families and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and try to find those folks who committed this act. He further said terrorism against our nation will not stand. Experts will tell you that there are very few terrorist organizations that could pull off a series of coordinated attacks.
What about Boston? We have not heard about the other for some reason.
Correct. As far as we know right now, we have confirmation of 3 separate plane attacks. Only one is confirmed by a U.S. official as a plane hijacking. That was American Airlines Flight 11 that was en route from Boston to Los Angeles, scheduled to arrive at 10:37 a.m. Pacific time.
And then the one allegedly at the Pentagon, we have no word about that as well.
Ended up being a Tennessee.
Is a quote.
Unbelievable destruction. One can only imagine the number of people who just now, as we're watching it moments ago, lost their lives.
You're watching continuing NBC News coverage on MSNBC. We are hearing from the Federal Aviation Administration, which has shut down air traffic over the skies of the United States. That reports that there was a hijacked plane heading to Washington, D.C. are unfounded. The FAA, after these initial 2 attacks, the 2 planes that hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, shut down air traffic over the United States, although they did allow planes that were currently en route to land. John Zito is an MSNBC producer. He lives in Lower Manhattan. He's on the phone with us now. John, where are you and what can you see?
I can't see much. I can't see more of about 3 feet in front of my face. all the debris and soot from the second tower is just showering down. There's paper and just black soot. I'm outside a bank, and a bunch of people are inside in the lobby taking cover.
Where exactly are you in relation to where the...
In the sense that what are police...
Craft apparently hijacked that crashed into the Pentagon. The building has been evacuated. There are reports of safety precautions being taken at the Central Intelligence Agency, at the National Security Agency. Capitol Hill has been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. But here at the Pentagon, I was actually in a taxi cab on Highway 110 when suddenly smoke started billowing out of the Pentagon. Very quickly, you heard ambulances and fire trucks headed that direction. Chris Wright, our producer at the Pentagon, who is on the northern side of the Pentagon, says he could not hear the explosion or feel any aftershocks or anything. Obviously, the Pentagon, a very large building meant to withstand terrorist attacks or any sort of other attack. But again, eyewitnesses describing a U.S. Air 737 crashing into the Pentagon at approximately 9:40 this morning. The Pentagon, except for some personnel, the Pentagon being evacuated, and we can actually smell some of the smoke now in the hallways here on the north side. John.
David Schuster in Washington, thank you. Britt Hume is with us once again, our managing editor in Washington. Britt, chaos and pandemonium, but how do we measure the response here?
Well, John, one thing worth noting is that you're going to hear all kinds of further warnings at a time like this, and precautions being taken. We've just learned, for example, that police have been sent to Union Station. A bomb squad has been sent to Union Station, which, as you know, John, is located just a couple of blocks from the Capitol. In fact, it's just adjacent to our Fox News bureau here in Washington. One senses that there will be many squads and many alerts and many more than there will be things found, but nobody's taken any chances in this town at this hour after the astonishing events that have unfolded so far here today. And, of course, you've been seeing the pictures and hearing the reports from down there at the Pentagon. Who would have imagined such a thing? It appears that the damage to the Pentagon, as bad as it was, we don't have any sense of whether there was loss of life or how extensive it was. That is an attack that looks like it could have been very much worse indeed had the airplane hit in a more central area of that building. So we're now watching, of course, the Capitol building with considerable urgency. It's right out the window of our bureau here. Because, as Brian Wilson reported, police on Capitol Hill are evacuating the place, saying that there was an airplane 20 minutes away, apparently, or they had reason to believe that it was headed this way. Now, we know their jets have been scrambled and have been in the air. It is hard to know whether a plane would ever be allowed to get close to Washington, D.C. in the air with all the airports closed at the moment or not, but that obviously is something we're watching with considerable interest and worry here.
All right, Britt, I just want to update you while you've been talking. Authorities at the Somerset County Airport confirm a large plane crash about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. We're trying to deal with only facts today and not rumors, because there are plenty of those swirling around, but we do have a confirmation of apparently another plane crash about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. You've got to assume that it's related to all of these goings-on, but we don't know any more information than that. Rick Leventhal, we are glad to know, is still with us in Lower Manhattan. Rick?
Yeah, John, we basically ran about 5 blocks down Church Street north, away from the World Trade Center, as that second tower was collapsing. A similar scene to the first one, where huge clouds of smoke began billowing down the street at us. And in fact, because of the location of the tower, it actually came down cross streets. So as we were running north on Church, we were passing cross streets, and the black clouds of debris and smoke were coming towards us down the side streets as well. So we were about 5 blocks, we're about 6 blocks north of where we were before. Things have settled down a bit now. The smoke is starting to clear. We've seen more injured coming our way, and there's a lot of police activity on the street. But it's a similar scene to what we saw earlier as the first tower collapsed, only this time people were ready for it, or more ready for it, and reacted swiftly. John?
All right, Rick Leventhal, thanks very much. Again, there is so much going on, it's difficult to update you, but you're looking at the cloud of dust, debris, smoke, and probably crumbled concrete over Lower Manhattan. The twin towers of the World Trade Center are essentially gone, 110 stories each, more or less. They are gone now. All of this taking place within the last 2 hours after they were struck by 2 airplanes. American Airlines is now confirming that its Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was hijacked, and apparently one of that plane was one of the 2 that slammed into one of the World Trade Center towers. We don't know anything more about the loss of life, but it is going to be considerable. David Schuster is with us now, again, not far from the Pentagon. David?
Well, John, I'm actually inside the Pentagon in our office at the Outer Ring, and again, we can confirm for you that intelligence sources are telling us that it was a U.S. Air 737 that crashed into the south end of the Pentagon at approximately 9:40 this morning. The Pentagon has been evacuated, but we do want to point out that at parts of the Pentagon, key personnel are still here, including the National Military Command Center. This is in the basement of the Pentagon and sort of a bunker type of a facility that is essentially designed to withstand direct attacks on the Pentagon. And we're told that officials there are still in that particular part of the Pentagon, are coordinating any possible U.S. response, as well as trying to gather intelligence information, counterintelligence information, and essentially act as a clearinghouse from all the various intelligence agencies in Washington. There have been reports of precautions being taken at the Central Intelligence Agency in McLean, Virginia, at the National Security Agency. But again, here at the Pentagon, while most of the Pentagon and its 23,000 employees have been evacuated, the National Military Command Center at the base of the Pentagon is still here. You can actually smell the smoke now in virtually all of the hallways at the Pentagon, and fire trucks and sirens going off on the south side. But where we are on the northern side of the Pentagon in one of the outer rings, my producer Chris Wright says he could not feel any of the aftershocks of the explosion. There was no noise when the plane apparently crashed this morning at 9:40. But again, most of the Pentagon has been cleared out. Smoke pretty thick here in the halls. But some officials, of course, still at the Pentagon in the offices that are designed for some of these very scenarios. John?
All right, David Schuster at the Pentagon. Thanks very much. It appears, and we had the report from our Brian Wilson in Washington not too long ago, it appears Brian told us that that there was a report of a hijacked plane south of Washington, D.C. and headed toward the nation's capital. Now, it appears that that is the flight that went down about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. We told you that there was a confirmation from the Somerset County Airport. Authorities are saying that that may be the plane that Brian Wilson spoke of. Let's take you back again to New York and an absolutely horrific scene in lower Manhattan. The entire lower end of the island covered in smoke and floating debris. And what's missing? The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, 110 stories high. You are looking at the pictures from, the last half hour or so as the first tower simply collapsed on itself. This, and look at the debris raining down on other buildings. Imagine the horror. Now, here comes the second tower. This is the one that had the TV antenna on top, simply imploding on itself. 110 stories, the workplace of some 50,000 people. America, the loss of life here is going to be tremendous. Molly Falconer is at one of the New York area hospitals. Molly, it's got to be a scene of absolute chaos there.
John, this is an area under siege. So police have blocked off a block radius around one of the main hospitals here in New York, and paramedics are coming out onto the street asking people in the crowd to give blood. I'm sorry, the phone lines are going in and out, but they're asking people in the crowd to give blood to the people who are coming into this hospital. There are stretchers out on the streets on dollies draped in white sheets waiting for the injured to come in. I've seen ambulance after ambulance ferrying people into this hospital. It is a scene of utter chaos. The police have locked down this block. They're trying to keep people away, but people are standing at the barricade trying to find out who's inside this hospital. As far as we know, most of the burn victims are going up to Cornell Hospital. Some are going to Bellevue, but the majority are
area of the World Trade Center. You can't get below 14th Street, and there just feels to be like a massive exodus of people walking north to get away from the area as far away as they possibly can.
Maria, I know Kitty Pilgrim is with you as well.
That's right, I'm right
Kitty,
here.
tell us what you've been able to report on.
I'm actually reporting from Kennedy Airport at the United Terminal, and I was here this morning flying out. When they made an announcement about 20 of 10 that all flights were grounded, people thought it was just the normal course of airport business these days, and so there was not much of a reaction, and then the news started to trickle through. It was not an official announcement made over the intercom.
Kitty, let me interrupt for just a second. The Associated Press is reporting that federal officials fear that a second hijacked plane or another hijacked plane is headed towards the Pentagon, and I'm looking for the time on this. We will continue to check that out. Kitty, I apologize for interrupting. Why don't you continue? Did we lose her?
Everyone didn't react, but then the news came through. I have never seen Kennedy in this condition. I've been here many times. People are in absolute shock. No one's talking. They were just staring at each other with their arms dropped to their sides. A pin could drop in the United Terminal. There were a couple hundred people there, and no one was saying anything. After about 20 minutes, people rushed to the phones. You cannot phone out. There's no real access back to the city. People are trying to get back. They've unloaded the baggage from the planes. They've asked that everyone pick up their bag and take it out of the terminal and take it home. And they're asking everyone to please leave. People are just finding it difficult to leave. They are not officially evacuating Kennedy Airport at this point, at least at the United Terminal. The attendants have been asked to stay. And again, there's still several hundred people standing around not knowing what to do. No one's even speaking.
And again, for people, Kitty, thank you, not familiar with New York, Kennedy is the major airport handling international flights into the city. It is also an enormous complex of 7 or 8 or 9 terminals.
That's exactly right. And in fact, the baggage has been unloaded into a separate terminal from where I am, and they're asking people to walk over, pick up their bags, and take them out. It's virtually impossible to get from place to place at Kennedy, and of course, bridges and tunnels into Manhattan are inaccessible at this point. No one has anywhere to go.
Kitty, thank you. We'll get back to you. Chris Plant at the Pentagon has more. He joins us on the phone. Chris, what can you tell us?
Hi, this is Chris Plant at the Pentagon.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Chris, we hear you. Go ahead.
All right. The area to the west of the Pentagon has been evacuated further back by law enforcement and military officials as they anticipate a second aircraft arriving at the Pentagon. It's been deemed to be threatening enough where I saw at least one F-16 fighter jet in the air over the Pentagon headed to the west where the plane was reportedly coming in from. Again, they're saying here that a second aircraft is expected to arrive at the Pentagon sometime soon. They take it seriously enough that they have scrambled at least one fighter jet that I saw, probably either from the D.C. Air National Guard or the Maryland Air National Guard, both of which fly F-16s. The west front of the building of the Pentagon along Route 27 has now partially collapsed. About a 60-foot section of the building laterally has collapsed the entire 5 stories. The building is obviously, the fire is traveling inward in the building toward the courtyard, and this wedge, as they call it, of the Pentagon, the westernmost wedge, which was just refurbished and was in fact reinforced for terrorist attack and for just this sort of thing. I know that there were a significant number of injuries. I'm unaware of any numbers on fatalities at this point. People here who came from the building are suggesting that surely there were fatalities, but no one could confirm any. I have spoken to a number of people that I know who pulled people out of rubble. There were severe injuries. There are a number of helicopters here evacuating injured people, and I'm told by one senior military source that the plane in the side of the building has been tentatively identified as a Boeing 767, a full-sized airliner, Boeing 767. But that at this point they're waiting for the arrival of a possible second plane, which has been deemed to be a threat, and as I said, fighter jets have been scrambled to address that matter.
Chris, stay with us. That's extraordinary bit of information coming out of Washington now. Let me add to something that we said earlier. We have a report now that a large plane crashed this morning north of the Somerset County Airport, which is in western Pennsylvania, not too terribly far from Pittsburgh, about 80 miles or so. Boeing 767 jet, don't know whose airline it was, whose airplane it was, and we don't have any details beyond that which I have just given you. We don't know if this is somehow connected to what has gone on in New York and Washington, but we do know that another plane has crashed, this one about 80 miles south of Pittsburgh, or at least to the southeast of Pittsburgh. Rose Arce, one of our producers here in New York, joins us on the phone. Rose, what do you have that's new?
Yes, just a while ago, I think you saw that collapse of the top of the World Trade Center. Well, it looks like a large chunk of that debris has hit a building very close by, about 2 blocks away next to an elementary school, causing another explosion. So for the last few minutes, I've been watching people running from that direction. There was one man, I'm not child, but you saw on the street. I've seen several emergency service workers carrying other emergency service workers from the scene. There's a haze everywhere. It's very, very difficult to see, but there has been the whole area has been covered by soot and ash. So it looks almost like snow. So as people are coming up the street running from the scene of this new explosion, you can see them slipping on the ash and literally having to drag each other up the street. There's an incredible amount of panic down here in downtown Manhattan as people are realizing that they really need to leave the area entirely after spending the last hour or so just watching this from afar.
Rose, stay with us. Terrific work. Let me throw another couple of pieces of information out as we continue to put this all together into a straight line if we can. The United Nations has been evacuated. The United Nations building on the east side of Manhattan has been evacuated. The city is in, this is election day, a primary election for mayor and city council races here in New York. That election has been postponed until further notice. Obviously, we are in the middle of an extraordinary catastrophe that started about 8:45 Eastern Time here in New York when one plane crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. About a half an hour after that, as people were converging, as fire and police and rescue teams were converging on the scene, a second plane appeared to the west of the Trade Center buildings and slammed into the second tower. That's what you just saw. Fire shooting out the north and east side of the tower. Shortly after that, we began to get reports of events taking place in Washington. An explosion which first came to us as a fire at the Pentagon. Now there's a report of a second hijacked plane heading towards the Pentagon. It is believed that one of the planes, perhaps both, but one of them we have been told was an American Airlines 767 that hit one of the Trade Center towers. About a half an hour after that, perhaps a little bit longer, lose track of time a little bit in these situations, the first tower, or let me correct that, the south tower, the second tower, the one to the left, collapsed. It collapsed in a cascade of smoke and spark, and what we cannot tell you is if there was a second explosion that caused that collapse or if it was simply, that's the first one, that's the south tower collapsing, and that was about a half hour, give or take, after the planes hit the tower. Then shortly after that, just as the smoke was starting to clear away, the second tower, and that's what you're looking at now. Again, this was not very long ago, 10, 15 minutes ago. The second tower, it almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see, except there is nothing controlled about this. This is devastation. How many people? There are 50,000 people who normally go to work in the Trade Center buildings. How many of those people had arrived already? How many of those people were trapped on the upper stories? How many of those people have been hurt? How many of those people died? We cannot tell you now. We can tell you that hospitals throughout the New York area are receiving literally hundreds of patients. And they are performing triage. They are trying to figure out who could be treated, who needs help first. This is sort of standard operating procedure. We are just being told now that Israel has evacuated all its diplomatic missions around the world. Israel has evacuated its missions. We are told now that Yasser Arafat has condemned these attacks, and we don't know yet who's behind them. Britain has condemned these attacks. Germany has convened its National Security Council, and we will check and see if events are going on in those places or if that is simply a reaction to what has gone on here in Washington and in New York. CNN's Gene Meserve joins us on the phone from Washington. Gene.
Hay Street, which is one of the major thoroughfares here in Washington, it is absolute gridlock. It takes about 15 minutes to drive 1 block. Ordinarily this time of day, there'd be nothing near this kind of traffic. You see pedestrians filling the sidewalks, many of the businesses and offices here having closed. You see cars.
The producer I'm working with, we had to break down a window just to breathe and just to escape the black cloud of glass and debris and dust. There were a couple of other people, two New York City police officers who were directly behind us, banging on the window to get in as well. We let them in, and because there were double door glass, but even two doors of glass, there was still horrible debris.
St. Paul International Airport has been shut down. The IDS Center in downtown Minneapolis, the tallest building in Minnesota, has been evacuated. In Georgia, all flights at Hartsfield, Atlanta, which as we know is now the nation's busiest airport, all flights at Hartsfield have been stopped. In Maryland, officials have tightened security throughout the state. In North Carolina, military bases have prepared for possible change in status. In Pennsylvania, Philadelphia International Airport has been closed, and we know about the crash near the Pittsburgh airport. In Colorado, city and state officials have stepped up security around the government buildings there. The city opened an emergency prepared office in the basement of City Hall, where representatives of police, fire, and health agencies are convening at this point. And in California, the state has been put on high alert by Governor Davis. In Tennessee, the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons and research complex in Oak Ridge has been put under heightened security. In Kentucky, the Southern Governors Association canceled its annual meeting. And in West Virginia, a chemical plant security has been heightened there. Flights out of Charleston's Yeager Airport, which is the largest airport in West Virginia, have been suspended. So it is clear that air traffic in the United States, for all intents and purposes, has been shut down.
And we also have word that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce building at The Hague has been evacuated, so we are seeing global reaction to this. Bill, we also have an expert with us on the phone. George Eisen, who is a terrorist expert at William Patterson College, joins us. Professor Eisen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Your reaction, please, and how this could happen.
This is such a coordinated activity that it had to have an extremely highly sophisticated infrastructure to carry this one out. Obviously, when I was talking to you, there's no such a thing terrorist expect in such a magnitude. As I'm watching myself, this is a tragedy beyond description.
Should we be surprised by this, Professor Eisen? I mean, this has long been the fear that there would be something of this magnitude, but we were told at the same time that perhaps security officials would know about it ahead of time. So as Sue said, how could something like this happen?
I'm returning again to my earlier point. The sophistication of this entire enterprise leaves me speechless. The coordination. It cannot be just a lone cowboy who is just riding into the twin.
And just trying to see what they do next, I guess. Down in New York City.
Exactly, and the people that are at the airport are still on the airside part of the airport, if you're familiar with that. Right now I'm inside the landside terminal, and it's like a ghost town in here, David. All the counters are shut down where you would normally check in for your flight. There is exactly one person working at the counter in the entire landside terminal right now, and the departure boards that they set up to tell you when your flight's going to leave.
Case University, which is inside the fallout zone of all the debris from the two building collapses. At the time of the first building collapse, I was at Broadway and Park Place. There was a huge cloud of smoke. It overcame the crowd. People were stampeding. Literally, the debris was so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. I ducked around into a building that was on Park Place and Beekman Street. When I was in there, people were coming in. They were crying. They were wailing. You couldn't see anything outside. After the smoke had cleared a little bit, I came outside. The scene was like a ghost town in the financial district, very eerie. You saw people being wheeled on gurneys away from the site of the explosion. People were coming out with masks over their face, anything they could put over their face, because the air was still very thick with debris. The ash on the ground is at least 2 inches thick. It's more like snow cover, a very eerie snow cover blanketing downtown Manhattan right now. Now, at the time, I was back on the corner again of Broadway and Park Place. At that time, the police started running toward us, telling everybody to move who was left on the street. I looked up, and that's when I heard the, pardon me, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down. Again, whoever was left on the street started stampeding. I'm in the office. Right now I'm in the main building of Pace University. People are crying. They have gas masks on their face. Authorities are making people go toward the basement. They're just doing anything that they can to move people away from the financial district. But again, it is a very horrifying scene down here, very eerie, like a ghost town.
Patty, let me interrupt you. Mayor Giuliani is on the telephone, is part of New York One's coverage. We join our affiliate for that.
Mayor Giuliani, since we have New Yorkers listening, and obviously their thoughts are with the people who are down there.
Urge them to remain calm, to remain at home, or to remain at their place of business, unless they're in Lower Manhattan. By that I mean south of Canal Street. If you're south of Canal Street, get out, walk, and walk slowly, carefully. There are plenty of police around, but just walk directly. If you can't figure out what else to do, just walk directly north. That'll get you out of the dangerous smoke area. It'll also do us a big favor. It'll open up those streets, because we're going to be moving a large number of ambulances and emergency personnel in and out of there all day. I've talked to the governor. He is putting the National Guard on alert so that they can relieve our police officers and our firefighters later this afternoon. And we've asked the federal government for help from the urban search and rescue team. So right now, we're using all of our police and firefighters and emergency personnel to help the people down there. Later on, we're probably going to need reinforcements.
Mayor Giuliani, I realize that it must be more than a chaotic situation, particularly since the bunker has been compromised and cordoned off. But can you give us any sense? There are so many people watching now who must have loved ones down in that area and are concerned of the systematic...
My heart goes out to them. I've never seen anything like this. I was there from shortly after it happened and saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. It's a horrible, horrible situation. And all that I can tell them is that every resource that we have is attempting to rescue as many people as possible. And the end result is going to be some horrendous number of lives lost. I don't think we know yet. But right now, we have to just focus on saving as many people as possible.
Can you give us a sense of if there is, in fact, some system being implemented, what that system is, and where people are being taken?
People are triaging. People are being taken to every area hospital possible, even virtually within minutes. I drove down right past St. Vincent's Hospital, and I could see them actually on the street ready to take people, and that was within minutes of the first airplane hitting the World Trade Center. So the hospitals are ready. We'll be moving them to all different area hospitals, triaging them. The main thing is having those streets open so that we can get people in and out of the southern part of Manhattan as quickly as possible, so that we can move them, to hospitals all over the city.
And Mayor Giuliani, we'll let you...
in place. They're doing it. We just need the cooperation of people in getting out of there.
We'll let you get back to the operations there, and we do appreciate you taking the time for us here.
But once again, the only thing to do now is to remain calm and try to assist in the rescue effort.
Thank you.
Now let's pray.
That's New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani talking to a CNN affiliate New York One here, saying that clearly there's going to be tremendous number of lives lost on these attacks here in New York, urging people to stay calm and to leave the area calmly. The area is in the southern part of Manhattan, way down on the tip of Manhattan Island. The mayor urging people to calmly move north. CNN's Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon. Jamie, why don't you start, if you can, at the beginning here as we try and put some order to all of this. What happened?
Well, let me just describe the scene that we have here, and I'll back up a little bit. But right now I'm looking at the charred facade of the Pentagon, a huge gaping hole on the side where the Pentagon heliport is located, the side that faces Arlington Cemetery. In front of me is a long line of rescue personnel with backboards. They're just waiting for victims to be brought out so they can rush them to nearby medical facilities. I see a few victims being treated on the grass outside the Pentagon. Firefighters continue to pour streams of water onto the side of the building, and a huge black cloud of smoke continues to billow out. It is a scene of utter destruction here. I'm sure it pales in comparison to the World Trade Center, but I've never seen anything like this myself in the history of the Pentagon. There's been nothing like this. Again, a huge gaping hole. You can see the exposed 5 floors of the Pentagon offices just ripped apart. Our report is that an aircraft of some kind, and at least one witness identified it as a civilian aircraft, hit the side of the building shortly after the incident in the World Trade Center this morning. People who were in their offices nearby reported hearing a huge explosion, seeing shards of shrapnel come by their window. The entire Pentagon has been evacuated. Short time after this attack, there were urgent announcements made over the loudspeaker telling people to quickly get away from the building because they had reports of a second plane heading this way just 2 minutes away. F-16 jets were scrambled over the Pentagon. I saw several of them go by, but no second plane ever materialized, and the building remains completely evacuated as firefighters continue to pour columns of water on the devastated side of the Pentagon, and rescue personnel
them successfully got out of the buildings. There you see the second tower being attacked by what is believed to have been a hijacked commercial jetliner, and a short time later, with people still trapped inside, it came down, crashing to the street below, where there were still people below trying to rescue others.
Shortly before that, a plane crashed into the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. About 18 to 20 minutes after that, you see that explosion at the lower part of your screen just above our ticker. That is the second plane that crashed into the World. Bush was in Sarasota, Florida. He calls the crash an apparent,
which is about a block and a half from the White House. The White House has, of course, been evacuated. The evacuation at 9:41 a.m. this morning, when they told all of the press, all of the White House staff to leave the building.
Explosion followed
to Union Station, and apparently what that was about was what appeared to them to be an unexploded bomb over there. Now we're going to be in for a lot of this, and we need to keep our eyes open here to take things with a grain of salt. We haven't had a further report on whether there's been anything more to that than just why they went over there, but that's what it was. In addition, the American Muslim Political Coordination Council, which is a function of the Council on American Islamic Relations, that's a group located here in Washington, has released a statement condemning the apparent terrorist attack, saying, quote, American Muslims utterly condemn what are apparently vicious and cowardly acts of terrorism against innocent civilians, join with all Americans in calling for the swift apprehension and punishment of the perpetrators. No political cause, it says, could ever be assisted by such immoral acts. In addition, John, there was a report, I should say, kicking around on the air of an attack on Camp David, the presidential retreat north of Washington. Senior officials in the administration are saying that that is not true. So that's where that matter stands. Back to you, John.
Britt Hume, thanks for the updated information. Yeah, it bears repeating. There will be a lot of rumors, a lot of panic swirling around today. Whatever you can do to stay calm, gather your loved ones around them, and then just give them a hug is certainly is advice that I think is worth taking. There is clearly a catastrophic loss of life in the World Trade Center itself. Let's get an update now from our Rita Cosby, who is in the Washington, D.C. area. Rita, what have you found out?
Well, John, I just wanted to let you know I've been talking to FAA officials, and they are saying that they keep getting repeated reports of possible hijackings. Obviously, as you said, this is still very early on, but they're getting a lot of different calls from throughout the country. One report from Chicago. They're looking into the crash in Pennsylvania, which was a 767, a wide-body plane. They don't know if that is related or not, but they're getting numerous calls. It's obviously flooded. They said at this point, normally at this time of day, there are typically 4,000 aircraft aloft in the United States. These are international, domestic flights, a variety of ones, and these include military planes as well as private and commercial aircraft. At this point, there are only just a few hundred at this point because they have ordered a national ground stop as of 2 hours ago. It's the first time in U.S. history that they have ordered all U.S. planes to be grounded immediately. International flights are being diverted to Canada, and the ones that are domestic are being ordered to reach their destination as soon as possible. There are 450 airports in the U.S. that have control towers, and all of them have been told to alert their planes to hurry up and get in.
Rita, I want to go to Shepard Smith, who's on the roof of our building here in Midtown. Shepard?
And no, if you guys know about these fighter jets, have we already reported on the fighter jets that are flying now?
There are fighter jets, we understand, flying over Washington, D.C. Shepard Smith, again, is not able to hear me, but he is on the building roof of our building here in Midtown Manhattan and says that fighter jets are circling Manhattan.
We're standing back again on the roof of 1211 Avenue of the Americas at the Fox News headquarters, and we're watching as two fighter jets circle what is lower Manhattan at quite an altitude. Peter Blangiforti is an engineer who's up here, and he was first to see them pretty high up, I guess.
Very high up they were, and I saw one in this direction, and it went down around by the World Trade Centers, and then I saw another one coming from the opposite direction, and we lost track of that one. But they seemed to look like fighter jets, but they were flying very high.
Yeah, we can only assume that this is part of security that's now gone into place. John, you saw the world. You were up here setting up.
Yes.
John McKay was up here setting up for this live shot when the first of the World Trade Centers fell. Tell me what was going on.
Couldn't believe it. Peter just said the tower just fell, and we were working and turned and looked, and
if we were looking from here, it would be the tower on our left side.
Yeah, the east one. Yeah, it just went into a huge cloud of smoke and dust.
So you're watching.
Yeah.
And then how long before the next tower?
About 10 minutes, I would say. We were just busy working and just, butterflies in their stomachs and just can't believe it's all happening. And then the next thing we know, we turn around, the other one's going.
Peter Blangiforti was explaining how the noise and the way it came across the city.
It seemed to have rumbled almost as if there was another large aircraft flying overhead, but really I think it was the collapse of the building, the violent explosion just coming across, just sound waves coming across the city.
The sound waves making their way up from lower Manhattan into the Flatiron District and up into Midtown, coming like a jet flying right overhead, I think is how you described it.
Yeah, just the rumblings of a jet sound almost, but it sounded more like a deep rumbling, probably from the explosion of the collapse.
It probably goes without saying at this point, as we pan back down to where the World Trade Center stood just a couple of hours ago, that communications in this city have become very difficult. There are people all over the world, no doubt, who knew people who were inside those two buildings. Some of the facts as they stack up, there are positives in all of this. In the first place, the first plane to crash allowed time for so many people, we would pray, to get out of those two buildings. And certainly before the collapse happened, there was time for a number of people to get away. If you are considering or trying at this moment to make a phone call into the New York City area or the Washington area, it's time for the good of the country to put the phone down and wait and rely on mass communications, because the people who are constructing what will be an enormous security situation now need as many lines as humanly possible. We don't have telephone lines on top. Our cell phones no longer get out. In the minutes after the first plane crashed, the phone began ringing in my house. It's the office, it's your mother, it's your father, it's your brother, it's your girlfriend. The phone lines immediately jammed throughout the city. There is a plea now for people around the world who may be watching not to use the telecommunication systems at this moment, because the people who are mounting this rescue effort need it. It was described by Peter Blangiforti as others as a collapse around a pole which stood. Peter, you were describing what looked like maybe a big support column. You can keep the camera down there. You were describing still seeing something before the smoke rose.
Before the smoke rose with the second tower, when it collapsed, you just saw almost as if one of the large girders or beams was going straight through the building and was the only thing left standing like a toothpick. And eventually that dropped too before the smoke engulfed everything else. But it was just a very strange, surreal sight.
Well, there are certainly reports from all over the city of what it was like in the minutes after the two towers were struck. Radio reports in the cab on the way here from reporters who were watching people literally jumping out of buildings. Certainly there was a massive fire and smoke on many different floors of the building. The size of the jet would lead us to believe certainly that a number of floors were wiped out almost immediately. and then the chaos to try and get out of that building. But certainly there will be stories of miracles as we go through all of this. And those people who were in that building, and after the first explosion happened and the first crash happened, word of people who got out. I was listening on the radio, broadcasting live just about an hour ago, to a woman who was in the second tower to be hit. She was able to walk down 92 floors in what she described to be a pretty controlled situation. 92 floors down the west tower of the building. She was able to walk without any chaos to give a radio report live. It's my understanding that literally thousands of people in the time before the two towers collapsed were able to make their way away from that area. Mass transit was certainly down at the time, but it's a quick walk to get out of that area. They had, what, a good 45 minutes, Ann Woolsey, to begin to make their way to the north. In Midtown right now, I was looking over this building and down into, in fact, I'm doing so right now. I'm looking down onto 47th Street, right below us. This to my right here, no, you don't have to, you can't see it from there, I don't believe. Maybe you can see Times Square over here. You can't. This is Times Square right below me. This is a scene right now at 11:15 in the morning, at 11:15, when this would be a sea of tourists on a spectacular day in Manhattan, and instead sirens echo across Manhattan, and that is the TKTS stand. I believe you're looking at that now. You're not able to see that, are you? The TKTS stand, can you see it on the lens? We can't. Pan back down to where the World Trade
numb
Center
shock all over this city and all across America. If you're watching us now, you're looking at the lower end of Manhattan where the World Trade Center once stood. It is gone this morning, obliterated after two strikes in coordinated attacks from airliners, one of them apparently hijacked from American Airlines. We are going to be getting a news conference from American Airlines in about 15 minutes. In the meantime, an Arabic newspaper, a fairly authoritative source, the editor of that London-based newspaper, says Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born, now exiled to Afghanistan rebel leader, Osama bin Laden, according to this newspaper editor, warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interests, and he promised a very big one. Now, we cannot yet attribute this to Osama bin Laden. However, that was the promise from this fairly authoritative London newspaper.
Well, John, certainly sources that I have talked to this morning, terrorist experts say this has the signature of Osama bin Laden, that he has the money, the network, the ability to carry out this type of coordinated attack. And let me point out that in the East African bombing terrorist trial here in New York City of the bombing of the two embassies in East Africa, that 3 of the alleged co-conspirators, one is now in jail, 2 are in jail, one's in jail, 2 cooperated for the United States government at the trial. They had pilot's licenses, and they can fly airplanes. So I'm sure investigators right now are trying to figure out a possible scenario. Were these planes hijacked by bin Laden people? Did they rush up to the cockpit? You don't need a gun. You can use burst in, several of them, and strangle the pilots or something, and then take over the controls of an airplane near the last minute while you're flying, and divert the plane and smash it right into the World Trade Center towers or in the Pentagon. Clearly, that is a scenario that I would think that investigators are trying to go on right now to try and figure out exactly what happened, who is responsible for this horrible act, and I also think that we have now entered a new era, clearly a day of infamy. That we are not, in this country, clearly immune.
September 11th, 2001, you're going to remember this day for a long time, and a lot of things in this country will change as a result of what you're seeing on your screen now. Not all of the chaos, perhaps the worst of it in terms of loss of life, but not all of the chaos is taking place in Manhattan. Washington, D.C. also has been under attack. U.S. airplane apparently hijacked as well, slamming into the outside wall of the outer ring of the Pentagon. Our David Schuster is there and has an update for us. David?
John, we have the eyewitnesses describing it as a U.S. airplane at approximately 9:40 this morning approaching National Airport from a strange approach. The eyewitnesses claiming that it then slammed into the south side of the Pentagon. We've just spoken with a U.S. Air spokesperson, Rick Weintraub, who says that all of their aircraft, commercial aircraft, have been accounted for, and says that they are unaware of any one of their planes involved in this incident. So this may be a case of an eyewitness misreading the markings on the plane, but we can confirm for you that there is a large gaping 50-foot hole on the E-ring of the south side of the Pentagon near the helipad. We're getting reports from Arlington, formerly Arlington Hospital, which is now an Ananova Hospital, that injured are being taken there. The Pentagon has been evacuated. The smoke is still pretty thick here in the Pentagon, even on our side, the north side of the Pentagon, and most of the 23,000 employees here at the Pentagon have been evacuated. But again, we do not have confirmation on the which commercial airliner may have been involved in this particular incident at the Pentagon. U.S. Air says that it was not one of their aircraft, that perhaps the red markings that an eyewitness saw might belong to American or Southwest, or American or one of the commuter airlines that fly in a national airport, which is just a few miles away. But again, we are confirming that an counterintelligence source is confirming that it was a commercial aircraft that slammed into the Pentagon this morning. There's no indication yet on the number of injuries or those killed. Some initial reports are that some Arlington hospitals are being flooded with injuries. There were dozens of fire trucks and ambulances that were streaking towards the Pentagon at approximately 9:45 this morning, and most of the employees here heading out of the building, and most of them are in fact now gone. But you can hear the sirens still throughout the Pentagon hallways. Smoke still pretty thick here on this north side. It is worth noting, though, that perhaps this incident could have been worse. There are five concentric rings on the Pentagon, and the one that was struck on the south side by the helipad, which is where officials land the helicopters and whatnot, is the E-ring, and apparently there's a large gaping hole. This particular ring is sort of the offices of senior military personnel, but again, no indications about the number of injuries, the number of killed, but one would presume that if the eyewitnesses were correct, and there's several eyewitnesses of some type of commercial aircraft, perhaps as large as a 737, that there would be numerous fatalities involved in this incident, and still the aftermath still being felt here at the Pentagon. The entire area shut down. Traffic has been blocked on 395 and 110, the main highways near the Pentagon.
Are walking north to get out of the way. You can see just to my left here, these are even the ambulances which were down there are being moved north. The firefighters are being moved north. Everybody is being moved north. We're being asked by the police now to go north and get out of the way. Officer, do you have any idea of what the problem is?
There's a report of a secondary device possibly in the area of this school, so they're going to move everybody back as a precaution.
Secondary device meaning a bomb?
Possibly.
Okay, and where did that report come from? Was it called in?
It came in over our radios, and it's reported through our supervisors on down, so we're pulling everybody back.
And that's in the Stuyvesant High School right there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Officer McQuaid. That's Officer McQuaid of New York City Emergency Service. I'm sorry, what's it? Yeah, well, I don't think there was anyone in the school, Katie, this morning. At this point, I think everybody had been evacuated from here probably when the first events took place early this morning, just because of the fact that it's so close to the World Trade Center. Most of these buildings around here have been evacuated, so I would imagine, I never saw any kids going into that school this morning, so I'm going to presume that they never even allowed them to get to school this morning, and that anywhere that were here at 8:45 were probably moved out almost within moments after the crash took place, because it literally is only about 10 blocks north of here, and I haven't seen any students coming in or out. Katie, Tom.
All right, that's Pat Dawson outside the Trade Center as they get moved back because of fears of another explosion. We want to catch you up to date now with the airplane situation. Airplanes apparently were used in these attacks today, commercial jetliners, and I want to remind you you're watching NBC News coverage here on MSNBC. An FBI spokesman says the planes involved two American flights, American Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, involved in hitting one of the trade towers. Also, American 77 was involved apparently in one of the attacks, at least was hijacked. We don't know where that plane ended up.
two United airplanes, United 175. That was scheduled Boston to Los Angeles. I just checked United's website. That plane supposedly left Boston at 8:14 this morning Eastern Time. Also United 93 from Newark to San Francisco. According to the United website, that plane left at 8:42. We do not know, except with American 11, exactly which plane ended up where. But according to the source from the FBI, those are the four commercial planes that have been involved in what is going on today. Now, we have been reporting another plane down some distance from Pittsburgh today. According to reports, and I want to stress this is coming from the affiliate there who got this from the scanner, so let's put this in perspective. But that plane believed to have originated in Chicago and was headed to Cleveland with 90 people on board. No word on the airline. And I'm just seeing, crossing the Associated Press wires now, American Airlines says it has lost 2 aircraft carrying a total of 156 people. Now, just crossing the Associated Press, American Airlines confirming 2 of its airplanes involved, a total of 156 people on board. Rick Sanchez is in Lower Manhattan. Rick?
Yeah, there have been, Lester, am I on? Is that you?
Yeah, Rick, go ahead. Lester.
Yeah, Lester, there have been about four explosions here since about 11 o'clock. The most recent about 2 minutes ago that seemed to shake the ground that we're on. We're about a block and a half away from what used to be the World Trade Center. The area is completely surrounded in soot and ash. Firefighters and rescue officials are still really trying to get their act together. They're not quite sure how to approach this situation. They just did finally set up a command center. It's going to be set up at Chambers and West. They also have a triage center set up. That's at the local high school here, Stuyvesant High School, which is, as you know, not far from the World Trade Center. And there are still people in this area who are doing everything they possibly can.
Rick, I just want to stop you there. As the information's coming fast and furious, that's the same high school that we've just been reporting is apparently being evacuated for fears of a secondary device, another device. So even as you're reporting that, things are moving fast and furious. It's got to be incredibly difficult to figure out where safe ground is right now.
Well, we've been told, as a matter of fact, moments ago to try and get out of this area because they're moving everyone out. Their fear is, of course, that there are gas leaks, natural gas in this area that either fed into or out of the buildings that have exploded, and now those lines are open and may rupture. We're not positive and can't confirm exactly what has caused those 4 explosions we told you about at the beginning of our report, but there is reason to believe that they may be caused by some type of gas explosion or natural gas leaks in this area, and firefighters are extremely cautious as they try and work into the area. What they're doing now, Lester, is lining up on some of the adjacent streets and setting up, as what you know from covering stories like this, field forces, where they tell them, don't go out and freelance, don't go out on your own, stay in a group, we'll move into an area, and we'll somehow move in little by little. Meanwhile, firefighters and rescue officials, I just saw them come in as well,
Room 55,
and they had what appeared to be picks, axes, and other devices that they're going to be using perhaps to try and extricate people that might still be in there. The items that they had were handheld items that they were probably going to be using, we would assume, in some form to get into the area. However, at this point, we're only about a block away, and it does not appear that they're moving into the area.
Rick, I'm going to interrupt you here as we get new pictures in. These pictures from Washington, I believe it's tape or live. This is taped just a short time ago. This is the best look we've had at the damage at the Pentagon, where another plane apparently made a suicide plunge or was driven into a suicide plunge. There's the Capitol in the background. This just across the river in Virginia. The Pentagon struck sometime after 9 o'clock this morning as well. And again, this is tape of efforts to fight the fire there at the Pentagon. This following the 2 attacks earlier at the World Trade Center. Let's send it back over to Greg Jarrett now. Greg?
All right, thank you very much. Let me read from our hot file some new information coming in from 2 senior counterterrorism officials in the Clinton administration. They tell NBC News that the only organization with motivation and capability to execute a terrorist mission like this is Osama bin Laden. One official described this as the worst intelligence failure since Pearl Harbor, noting these attacks take months, if not years, to plan, and a large number of people. Joining us now on the telephone to talk about this, Lawrence Eagleburger, who's former Secretary of State under the Reagan administration. Mr. Secretary, thank you. What is your reaction?
Well, you've said part of it already, which is that it clearly is an intelligence failure of some magnitude. Although, you know, the thing that I'm particularly surprised at is I thought the one thing we had under control was that people couldn't hijack aircraft in the U.S. anymore, but it's fairly clear now that that's also failed. I thought we had that one pretty well licked, but apparently we don't.
Osama bin Laden, how hard is he to find, to capture? How elusive is he?
He's very elusive. We've had a hard time tracking him. Having said that, since I happen to believe that this now is as much an act of war as anything, I think it now becomes much more incumbent upon us to go massively against him, not just try to find him, but any place where he may have been, and any government which may have housed him, as far as I'm concerned, now ought to be declared an enemy, and we ought to declare ourselves at war with all of them, and we ought to get massively engaged in cleaning it out, even if we are not necessarily hitting precisely the people that did this.
If the ruling Taliban in Afghanistan has been, if they have been housing these terrorist camps, and our intelligence indicates that, correct?
Yep.
Then what should we do?
We should take action against the Taliban government. We should take action against Afghanistan.
What kind of action?
Military action, and in massive quantities if necessary. Look, the basic point, it seems to me, and I don't think we ought to panic on this, and I sound like I am and I'm not, but the basic point here is this is, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest equivalent to Pearl Harbor we've had in the last 60 years. And it's an act of war, and we ought to respond to it that way.
Lawrence Eagleburger, former Secretary of State, if you'd stand by for just a moment. Let's go to NBC's Andrea Mitchell for more from your vantage point. Andrea, where are you and what can you contribute?
The State Department has been evacuated, so I am here in the Washington Bureau, and Secretary Eagleburger is exactly right. The view within this administration, as within prior administrations, is that this is an act of war and that they do have plans. They have already, within the last 3 weeks, warned the Taliban government in Afghanistan that any act against the United States would be considered an act of war against the Taliban, against Afghanistan, or by the Taliban, I should say, and that retaliation would be done against Afghanistan. You will recall that after the embassy bombings in Tanzania and in Kenya, the U.S. did retaliate against Afghanistan and did retaliate against Sudan. That one, the latter, against Sudan, highly controversial because there were suggestions that they didn't have adequate evidence that Sudan was really implicated. But Secretary Eagleburger knows this as well as anyone, or better than most. This is going to prompt military action by the United States. The immediate problem, of course, is how to respond to what could be an ongoing crisis, given the fact that we have other airplanes that may or may not have been hijacked, and that buildings are still being secured, that we had an incident at the Pentagon today. The State Department has been evacuated. The NSC top officials are right now in the Situation Room conducting meetings. Other NSC officials are across the street in the old Executive Office building, but everyone else is out of the White House. At the CIA, George Tenet, the Director of Central Intelligence, is in meetings with his top officials, not in his normal operations center, not in his office, but in a special secure location. The State Department Operations Center has been moved out of its location to another location in Virginia.
Mr. Secretary Lawrence Eagleburger, are you still with us? If you are, what happens? You've worked for a great many years in government. What happens in the Situation Room? What does the President do with his advisors?
Well, you know, assuming that this President acts like most presidents, he will gather them together and he'll ask for advice, and in the last analysis, he will make up his mind on what ought to be done. He'll have to hear from particularly his military advisors on what is available to react. You'll have to hear from Secretary Powell on how you deal with the other governments around the world to explain what it is we're doing, assuming we decide to do something. And by the way, I hope it is more than what we did when we responded to Osama the last time. We need to, this is massive, the retaliation has to be massive, and I might say, I don't care very much about which terrorists they're going after. If they are clearly terrorists and they are antagonistic to the U.S., they ought to be considered, although it is also true that Osama bin Laden ought to be target number one. But anyway, the President will go through the discussion, and in the end, he will ask for suggestions on what ought to be done. They will put together a program and a plan, and he will bless it, and then they will go off and do it.
Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you a few more questions about Osama bin Laden, who increasingly, as the minutes and hours move on, is now probably the focus of our investigation into this very sophisticated and highly coordinated attack that took place beginning shortly before 9 o'clock this morning. We want to show our viewers who are just now joining us some of the videotape. The first tower had been struck, and there is the second plane, a terrorist attack, a hijacked American commercial jetliner crashing into the Second World Trade Center within an hour. Both towers collapsed to the ground. We heard NBC's Pat Dawson interviewing authorities. They anticipated that there were as many as 10,000 people inside each of these buildings when the day began. And as you see the collapse of the second building, it is unclear how many of them were still trapped inside, how many of them were able to get out. People on the ground as well died. To update also, beyond just Manhattan, the Pentagon, also the target of a terrorist attack, apparently according to eyewitness, a jetliner that had been, we presume, hijacked as well, crashing into the Pentagon. United Airlines now confirming a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco crashed near Pittsburgh. In all, it is believed 4 hijacked planes, bringing so much horrific destruction. Also, we should tell you, planes across America have been grounded. Airports are closed. The nation's capital has been evacuated. The White House evacuated. And once again, you see the second crash of a hijacked jetliner into the World Trade Center towers that then came tumbling down.
There are a series of reports to give you from all across the United States. Governments, state governments reacting everywhere to what has happened. We'll bring you a list in just a moment, but let's go to Lester. He has an update for us.
All right, we're getting a little more information about the planes used in the attack of the World Trade Center. American Airlines is providing information now. Says two of its airplanes were hijacked, both used in the attacks on the Trade Center. One was Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. It was hijacked. That plane driven into one of the towers. The other plane was Flight 77. I don't have information yet on the kind of airplane involved there. American says those two planes carried a combined 156 people. Both of the attacks of the World Trade Center involved hijacked American Airlines planes. Keep in mind there were 2 United planes hijacked today. As you reported, the 757 from Newark to San Francisco is the one that apparently went down near Pittsburgh or in Pennsylvania. The other United flight, 175 from Boston to LAX, also hijacked. We have not confirmed the status of that airplane other than it was apparently hijacked, that according to the FBI. So we now know that both of the American planes were used in the New York attacks. United Airlines has apparently also lost 2 planes to hijackers as well. Greg, Chris?
Let me go back to former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, and let me read from Reuters, Mr. Secretary. Quote, "It is most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interests in an unprecedented attack, a very big one." This, according to the editor of the London-based Arab newspaper. Mr. Secretary, given that the warning was well known, and certainly American intelligence must have known about it, and given the fact that we knew that Osama bin Laden favors the use of aircraft and has launched a couple of attacks, one of which was actually defeated before it took place through intelligence, how is it we could not have known about this?
Well, I think that's fairly understandable. You said, or somebody said, that this was highly sophisticated and very well planned, and I think that's true, including obviously the ability to keep the thing quiet, and obviously also it required a great deal of money, which leads you again back to Osama bin Laden. The one thing I don't understand, and it's critical to the rest of this, I guess, is, as I said, I thought we had licked the problem of hijacked aircraft in this country. It can only tell me that there was really sloppy procedures at these airports if, in fact, they were able to get on these aircraft and then hijack them. If we had been able to prevent that, a lot of this wouldn't have happened. What I have to say I don't understand is the ability to hijack these aircraft. I thought we had that under control. Once you've got these aircraft in your hands, it's awfully hard to see how, unless we had fighter aircraft over New York City, it's awfully hard to see how we could have prevented what happened. That isn't to say that there wasn't an intelligence failure. Clearly there was. Having said that, I'm prepared to say that I don't think that was unexpected as much as this ability to hijack these aircraft. That I simply do not understand.
Former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, many thanks. We appreciate it, sir.
My privilege.
Chris?
A police official now saying, on the condition of anonymity to the Associated Press, that the number of casualties from today's attacks on the World Trade Center could be in the thousands. You only had to look at the pictures to understand the enormity of the potential for loss of life. Estimated at least 10,000 people in each tower at the time of the attacks. Felipe Ayola was on the 81st floor when a plane struck the tower. He is on the phone with us now. Were you in the first or the second tower, sir?
I was in the second.
Tell us what you saw and heard and what happened.
I was actually on 81 and on 2 World Trade and then an explosion, and it was in 1 World Trade, and I saw the flames. I ran down to 78, which is the main concourse, where I met up with my wife and co-workers, and then I was asked to go back upstairs because it was safe and the problem was only in 1 World Trade. And then when I went upstairs, I left my wife there, told her it was okay. I went up to 81. I was looking out the window with a co-worker of mine as another explosion happened and the entire room just collapsed on me. And I was able to find stairs, and I can't find my wife, and I'm looking around now for her. So if she's listening, I just want to let her know that I'm okay, and I'm trying to find her.
I believe that I'm going to go through my notes right now, and we are being told that there is a place, sir, where you can call the Red Cross. They are trying to do some tracking. 877 Red Cross. You can call 877 Red Cross, and they may be able to give you some information. They are trying to keep track of people. We wish you the best. I do not want to keep Mr. Ayola on the phone when he does not know where his family is. You can call 877 Red Cross. Please let us know if your family is okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
We are now learning that there is another bomb threat, and Greg, while you go to that, let me tell you a number of things that are happening across the United States. Government buildings in Washington are closed. There are a number of evacuations all across the country, building closings across the country, from the Space Needle in Seattle being closed as a precaution. Government buildings all across the country are on a state of high alert and have been closed. Greg, what are you learning from the hot note?
Dateline Cleveland from Associated Press. Mayor Michael White now says a Boeing 767 out of Boston has made an emergency landing at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport because of concerns it may have a bomb. So the threat continues. We are on
All 4 Disney parks have now been closed in the Orlando area. Presumably there are evacuations there, but all 4 Disney parks in the area of Orlando, Florida have been closed. In Los Angeles, police have gone on tactical alert. Governor Gray Davis has convened a meeting of the State Emergency Council. We understand that in Massachusetts, the acting governor, Jane Swift, has moved government operations to a bunker. Federal buildings in West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Delaware have been closed. Maryland has closed all of its public schools. Now let's go over to Lester.
Chris, I'm looking at the airplanes involved here and have concluded, just based on the information, that in air traffic control centers, they must have known something was up. Let's take, for example, the American Flight 11. It's a 767 going from Boston to L.A. New York City is not one of the places it will cross over on that flight. That plane at some point left its flight path with no doubt several minutes warning before it entered the New York area. Now, whether the crew on board was instructed to declare an emergency, say, do we have a problem? We don't know. But that would give you a good indication that air traffic controllers knew something was amiss. Take a look at the other American flight, American 77. That was going from Washington Dulles to L.A. American says it was involved in the World Trade Center attack. Again, New York is not between Dulles and Los Angeles. So once again, this is a plane that controllers would have seen veer from its flight path. The United flight, the one we believe down in western Pennsylvania, that one that would have been on its flight path. But those two that involved the New York attack would suggest that warning bells were going off somewhere. They may not have known the intentions, but they knew something was going wrong with those airplanes with some lead time. Tell me, we want to go to Jim Cummins now, who has been covering the American Airlines news conference. Jim?
That's right, Lester. We just a short time ago had a spokesman for American Airlines come out and say, and they are still gathering information. They're still not sure when they're going to have this briefing. But as you mentioned earlier, they had this release. I never thought I would be reading something like this. And it says American Airlines confirmed today that it lost 2 aircraft in tragic incidents this morning. They said the flights were Flight 11, as you said, a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles with 92 people on board. Flight 77, a Boeing 757 operating from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles with 64 people on board. That includes, of course, the flight crews. That comes out to a total of 156. And they said because of heightened security, due to the nature of today's events, American said it is working closely with U.S. government authorities. It says the government has shut down the entire air traffic system in the United States. American TWA and American Eagle will not operate. I stopped at DFW Airport on the way out here today. What they have done is they have sealed off the airport at every security checkpoint. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of pandemonium. Some people got sealed into the airport. Others couldn't get in. They came to meet flights. Flights were just being canceled one after the other while I was standing there looking at the monitors. And so the situation here at American Airlines headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas is this. Americans officials are meeting, they're huddled, they're trying to sort out what's going on. They told us they're going to have a statement sometime today, but we don't know yet when that will be. Lester?
And again, Jim, we want to put, here's the flights we know involved today that were hijacked. American Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, American Flight 77, both of those in the Trade Center attacks. There, United Flight 175, Boston to LAX. We don't know, we haven't confirmed the status of what happened to that airplane. And United 93, Newark to San Francisco, believe to be down in Pennsylvania. Jim, have American officials given us any indication on what communications preceded these crashes?
They have not. As you can imagine, there is a lot of concern here. Everywhere you walk, you see American employees looking just absolutely distressed. So the only information they have given us is just this one sheet of paper, which they handed out in a very low-key fashion, describing, in effect, 2 hijacked planes that were crashed today, killing, as I said, 156 people on those planes. They haven't said anything else about, if they had any early indications of this, but presumably, as you pointed out, these planes were definitely, diverted quickly, and so American would have found that out rather soon, I think, earlier this morning, and knew that something terrible was in the works.
All right, Jim Cummins, and if in fact controllers knew something was going on, the only thing they can really do is steer other planes out of the area. If they don't have contact with the plane, if it's left its flight path, all they can do is clear other airplanes out of the area as we watch once again one of those American planes plunging directly into the World Trade Center. Greg, Chris?
And of course, subsequently, both of the towers at the World Trade Center collapsed. Teresa Ward, who is on the phone with us now, was in the second building, the second tower, when the first one collapsed. Thank you for being with us at this difficult time. Tell us where you were, what you saw and heard. Can you hear us, Teresa Ward? We seem to have...
Peter Esman, hold for CNBC.
Hi, Teresa?
Yes, hi.
Hi, this is Chris Jansing at MSNBC. I understand that you were in the second building when the first one collapsed, is that right?
I was in the second building when the plane hit One World Trade.
What can you tell us about what you saw and heard?
Well, I was at my desk, just, starting my day, and we felt a shudder. The entire building sort of shuddered. And at first we didn't really think, we sort of didn't know what happened, and we looked out the window and there was just debris and papers like a ticker tape parade falling from the sky. And immediately we just, everybody calmly walked down the stairs, and a lot of people who had already been part of the original bombing were there with us, and we all calmly started exiting the building. And then we heard an announcement that there was an incident in one World Trade Center, but 2 World Trade Center was fine, so we could return to our offices. So we then took the elevator down, and clearly that was not correct. And as soon as I got out of the building, I could see that there was a second explosion because there was just burning debris coming down, showering on us, and we had to run for cover, and then they rushed us back into the concourse, and we were able to exit the other way. And by the time I got up to Houston Street, I turned around and you could see that 2 World Trade Center was just a cloud of smoke.
So you had been told to go back to your offices, but you made the decision to leave the building?
Yeah.
Obviously,
at that point, though, there was only an incident in one World Trade Center, and no one really knew what the incident was.
And you mentioned that you were with people who were there during the other attack, which you're talking about the 1993 bombing. Right. What was the conversation? What were people saying? What were they doing as you were getting out of the building?
You know, we were just calmly walking down the stairs thinking, you know, what the heck happened? You know, somebody said a plane hit the building. Another person said a bomb. We really had no clue what was happening. So everybody was relatively calm, having been through the experience of the first one, and there wasn't any smoke in the stairwells this time or anything like that. So the mood was very calm, and we were able to get out. But we got out right away as soon as we felt the shudder of the first explosion. So we were very, very fortunate.
You were, and thank you so much for calling us, and thanks so much. We're so glad that you are safe.
Make sure everyone and my friends and my family keep calling. I'm fine. Everybody's fine. Thank you very much.
Teresa expressing what certainly thousands of people are going through right now as they desperately try to reach family members who may have been in the World Trade Center or in that area this morning. The number of those certainly could number into the hundreds of thousands. And let me just tell you that the office of former President Gerald Ford has released a statement. Here it is. The United States must react strongly against this unconscionable terrorist attack. America should move aggressively to retaliate. Our governments must do everything possible to protect our citizens, echoing essentially the call of a former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, who said this is an act of war and America must take decisive action.
You are watching NBC News coverage on MSNBC. 2 planes shortly before 9 o'clock East Coast time crashed into the World Trade Center, collapsing both towers. The loss of life is no doubt catastrophic. The Pentagon also hit apparently by a suicide bomber who hijacked a commercial jetliner. We're following all of these terrorist attacks, and the question is, how could it have happened? Bill Arkin joins us now on the telephone. He is a military analyst and a consultant to MSNBC and NBC News. Sir, thank you for taking the time. The Rudman Hart Commission report earlier this year itemized the many ways the U.S. is, they said, totally unguarded, a sitting duck for a terrorist attack. The report said the U.S. would be hit, and hit very hard and very soon. Gerald Ford has suggested that we should strike aggressively. What should the U.S. do, and what will it do?
Well, it seems to me that there's sort of 2 things that Americans should think about today. I mean, one is our lack of preparedness. Even after the USS Cole was blown up in 1999 and the Khobar Towers incident in 1996 and the World Trade Center incident in 1993, our intelligence establishment has not solved the problem of doing any counterterrorism. As was said earlier on the air, these airplanes veered off of their courses, and yet no warnings could be delivered to the prospective targets of those hijackings. And our counterterrorism apparatus is really not able to respond. I mean, yes, we could lash out in the next day or a few days at the training camps of Osama bin Laden, as President Clinton did in Afghanistan. We could attack other terrorist organizations, but I'm not confident at this point that we really have a handle on understanding either who was responsible or where indeed they are to be found. There was just a story in the news this morning that was essentially saying that Palestinian organizations are having trouble coping with the number of suicide bomber volunteers that they're getting now to attack Israeli targets. This is not necessarily an easy problem to solve, but if I were an American today and I were thinking about this incident besides the enormous human tragedy involved, what I would certainly focus my attention on is how it is that we could possibly spend $30 billion a year on the U.S. intelligence establishment and have established hundreds of counterterrorism organizations in the last decade to deal with this very problem, and yet could be faced with such a massive tragedy at the same time.
One official said this was so sophisticated, so highly coordinated, it must have taken many months, if not a year or a year and a half, to plan. Where do we fail with our counterterrorism?
We failed because this morning at 8:59, before this incident occurred, at the Central Intelligence Agency in McLean and at the NSA headquarters in suburban Maryland, there were as many people working on the armed forces of Botswana as there were working on real-time counterterrorism issues. We have a constipated, blind intelligence establishment that we pay enormous amounts of money from our tax dollars every year, and they do not have their priorities focused on protecting American interests and American security. They're trying to do everything, and therefore they do nothing. And I think we are very passive in our response to counterterrorism as well. I mean, in this incident today, obviously, when two buildings like this are attacked, the disaster preparedness and medical establishment is going to have a very difficult time keeping up. This is not the scale of attack that any city, even New York City, prepares for. But having said that, we've focused so much attention in the past decade on responding to terrorist incidents. It seems to me that we have no idea of how we can avoid them in the first place, and we keep finding ourselves in this type of situation where I cannot say as an expert that I see any real changes in how we track terrorist organizations or how we deal with them or how we try to predict what they are doing in such a way that we are actually protecting American lives.
Bill Larkin, if you'll stand by for just a moment, we want to ask you a few more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, Greg, you mentioned the Rudman Hart Report. I'm holding it in my hand. It's a book. It's 146 pages long, and it says, as you indicated, that America is vulnerable to a catastrophic attack on the U.S. homeland. There have been 4 today, 2 in Lower Manhattan at the World Trade Center, another plane crash in Pittsburgh, and an attack as well on the Pentagon. Now, NBC's Joe Johns is standing by for us in Washington. We had heard quite a while ago about a report, Joe, that there was a report, there was an attack on the Capitol as well. That is unfounded. Joe Johns, can you hear us? We apparently have lost contact with NBC's Joe Johns, but I am told that when he was on the phone just a short time ago, he was confirming that any reports of attacks on the U.S. Capitol are unfounded. Nevertheless, Washington is virtually shut down.
Okay.
Major buildings there have been evacuated. Let's go now to NBC's Joe Johns. Joe, what can you tell us?
Well, Chris, to my knowledge, no attack on the U.S. Capitol so far. There has been a great deal of concern, obviously. Right now, the city of Washington, D.C. as a whole is under lockdown. If you look at the Capitol just behind me, it was evacuated probably starting around 9:30 this morning Eastern Time. The Speaker of the House of Representatives was escorted out. Both the House and the Senate adjourned for the day. All of the employees in all of the buildings sent home. The police have evacuated the streets around the Capitol, and traffic is snarled, any traffic that can get close to the Capitol building. Now, let me just give you a view. As you look across the horizon here, you can see the smoke rising from what I'm told is the Pentagon, where the apparent attack occurred earlier today. Senator John Warner of the state of Virginia, which is where the Pentagon is located, told reporters today that this today is another Pearl Harbor for the United States. Obviously, a great deal of concern here among the members of Congress. We talked a little while earlier today to Congressman Porter Goss who happens to be the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. He said, of course, the United States has a number of contingencies available. While he was speaking, there were 2 loud booms. Not sure exactly what those were. Chris, back to you.
Now, we understand there were those military surveillance flights over Washington, D.C. Have you been able to see them, Joe?
We have seen, as a matter of fact, within just the last 3 or 4 minutes, a military plane which looked like it was scrambling either out of Bolling Air Force Base or out of Andrews Air Force Base, which is obviously the Air Force base of choice in the Washington, D.C. area for military flights. That's about all we said. One thing that was of particular interest that really set off a huge stir at the Capitol between 9:30 and 9:45 Eastern Time, there was what appeared to be a very large plane, perhaps a 747. I saw it with my own eyes flying high above the Capitol, nonetheless directly above the Capitol, and then it veered off to a northwesterly direction. Highly unusual because we have always presumed here in Washington, D.C. that for the most part, and certainly on a day like this, the area over the United States Capitol is, in fact, restricted airspace. A number of others saw that, too. No clear word on what that plane was. From the distance, I could see no markings on it. It took a sharp right turn and just flew away, and we have no idea what it was.
NBC's Joe Johns, thank you very much. Want to make this point. The enormity of what has happened across the United States is almost unfathomable. A police source in New York City saying that it is likely, it is possible that thousands of lives have been lost in this terrorist attack against the United States. In addition, the Federal Reserve reports it is ready to provide additional money to the U.S. banking system as needed following today's attacks. The economic fallout could very well be in the billions of dollars.
We have been watching all morning long what was caught on videotape, and there you see it. The collapse of one of the 2 twin towers of the World Trade Center. In the end, both came crashing to the ground. We did hear an official say 10,000 people are normally in each of those buildings. However, we've double-checked our statistical information, and we have 50,000 workers in the 2 towers. And in addition to that,
so those people who have fortified structure within the White House compound where we know the Vice President was when everyone else was evacuated from the premises earlier. Again, the Secret Service does not want to confirm for us for security reasons, or administration officials the same, tell us where those people are now, although I was told a short time ago the Vice President is still in a position to be monitoring and directing the response to these developments, and that the President, who is en route back to Washington, we're told Andrews Air Force Base is on full alert. I was also told that there are extra precautions that were taken to ensure the President's flight back to Washington was a safe one. Now, you can read into that additional fighter jet escorts, Air Force One always has some escorts with it, that additional fighter jet escorts were put up for that. Now, the political reason they want to get the President back to the White House is rather obvious. The White House believes this has been a tragic terrorist attack, and they want to send a signal that the President is back on the job at the White House. Priority 1, though, officials say, is to guarantee that he can be safely brought back to the White House. And in the past half hour or so, we have seen security precautions on the street, checks being taken out on the street, on the grounds around the White House. There are snipers up on the roofs of the White House itself, including buildings around it. And a military helicopter gunship flew over the premises not that long ago, about 15 minutes ago now, and then it circled back over toward the Pentagon, where from my location you can still see smoke coming into the sky from there. But we are told the Vice President is still in a position to monitor all this as the President makes his way back.
John, thank you. Our senior White House correspondent, John King. As John mentioned, the President was in Sarasota, Florida, making his way back to Washington. Whether he'll be taken directly to the White House or not is a little bit unclear. The Secret Service wants to make sure the building is safe. It is, I would add, one other symbolic reason why you would want to get the President in the White House, and that's to send a message to who's ever responsible for this, that yes, you've caused extraordinary damage and a great deal of tragedy here, but what you haven't done is shut down the American government. The President will want to get home. Governor George Pataki of New York joins us on the telephone. Governor, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
What are you hearing from the Trade Center area itself?
Well, we're still hearing that it's a horrific situation. We're in desperate need of people to help out with emergency services. The city team is there, but we've activated our National Guard and our statewide fire and emergency services, and we're going to be bringing those in to relieve the city forces as the afternoon goes on. I've been in touch with the mayor, I've been in touch with the White House, and everything that we can do and everything that can be done is being done at this point.
Has anyone given you any idea of how many injured we are dealing with down?
Not at this point. At this point, the sole goal is to try to help as many people as possible, to get them to the emergency services, to get them the care they need, to help people who want to leave the area to leave in an orderly way, and to make sure we do everything we can to provide security throughout the city and throughout the state.
And Governor Pataki, can you tell me the degree to which the state's planning for these sorts of tragedies, and there's obviously a plan in place, and New York is, because of its place in the world, is obviously a place you have to consider a target, whether that plan envisions something of the magnitude of what has taken place this morning?
Well, you plan for any eventuality, but you never actually expect to see something of this magnitude. But we have coordinated well with the city. We're going to continue to make sure we provide all the support we can. We do have emergency services and emergency transportation running. I know the reports have been inaccurate. We do have limited rail service out of Grand Central to the northern suburbs, limited rail service out of Brooklyn and Queens to Long Island. We're working to make sure that bus service, to the extent possible, continues, and we're trying to get subway service back on track. It's not there yet, but the coordination has been excellent. It's just in an attack of this magnitude. We just have to focus on responding and helping people at this point.
And do you have any idea how many people have been hospitalized or how many hospitals are involved, whether they extend beyond the city?
Not at this point, but every emergency service, every hospital that can provide assistance is providing assistance. The people have been just terrific in their response, and we're going to continue to make sure that response is as strong as it can be.
Governor, take a moment and tell me, not as the governor necessarily, but as a resident of this state, an important player in the affairs of this state, what you're thinking today?
This is an enormous tragedy. I have friends in those towers. I have friends who were there this morning that we haven't heard from. And our thoughts go to the people who are there, to their families, to all those who are suffering at this time, and we will be there to help, and we will be there to do everything we can to make sure that the support and the services necessary are provided.
Shut down. And in speaking to a couple of authorities this morning, I'm not all that certain it will be up and running again tomorrow. So this has really hit at the heart of America, at the heart of our infrastructure, and has paralyzed a system that, frankly, many people thought was impenetrable. Dan?
Well, Bob Orr, in Washington, there's plenty of time to assess blame and where things need to tighten up, but when the question is asked, how could this happen in and around an airport, anybody who's been in an American airport in recent years would know how it could happen. That no matter what security measures were taken, just to look around your average airport would tell you that they had a lot of holes in the security. But all of that is for later on. NATO Secretary General George Robertson called today's attack, quote, an intolerable aggression against democracy. Secretary of State of the United States, the distinguished retired Army General Colin Powell, said to Latin American foreign ministers, he was in Peru, this is a, quote, terrible, terrible tragedy has befallen my nation, but it has befallen all of those who believe in democracy. What you're looking at live from the tip of Manhattan is a new face of war. You've heard talk about the terrorism, the war on terrorism, the war being waged by terrorism. Take a good look. This is what it's about. We've said for years that terrorism would soon be coming to America. It began coming here big time in the 1990s with the first attack on the World Trade Center and other terrorist attacks. There is a war. It's a 21st century kind of war. It's war by sneak attack, in this case a devastatingly effective one.
We have some photographs of these photographs taken from above and from afar. It's almost impossible to conceive of the death and injury, the blood and the screams of the dying when you have a picture this far away. There is someone weeping, or perhaps in fear forced. You saw that body come down the side of the building. The second plane hit the other tower at this time, is our belief. I'm just going to let the pictures speak for themselves for a moment. Eerie, Dante-esque scenes such as this repeated over and over again this morning. That area of Manhattan, New York City, once occupied by the majestic World Trade Center buildings, an indescribable scene of death and destruction. Where it was real blood and real screams of the dying, people seen leaping or being forced out of the building at fairly high levels. And when those buildings collapsed, that concrete and steel that came crashing down covered a wide area, a horrific sequence of destruction. And then there's this strange event, perhaps series of events that happened in Pennsylvania. Russ Mitchell has details on that.
Dan, that's right. One of the planes that was hijacked this morning apparently crashed outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, near the Somerset County Airport. This was United Airlines Flight 93 traveling from Newark to San Francisco. United Airlines has now assigned a number for families of victims to call. That number is 800-932-8555. Again, that's 800-932-8555. That's the number for families of victims of United Flight 93, which was hijacked this morning. It was en route from Newark to San Francisco and crashed outside of Pittsburgh. And Dan, as you're right, we watched this. It's surreal. We were just talking about it in the newsroom. It's like watching a movie. It really is. Only, of course, it's not.
The new face of war. And in Washington, where the Pentagon has been hit with at least some injured. If anybody's been killed, we're not yet aware of it, but we'll say that very little, if any, information has been coming from the Defense Department itself, and that is not a criticism. Understandably, they're focused at the Pentagon on trying to handle the situation. Now, President Bush was, at last report, flying from Florida, presumably to Washington, but we don't know that he's actually coming to Washington. We are told that the Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney, is in charge at the White House at this moment. He's in the Situation Room, which is below ground level in the White House. Those of us who covered the White House over the years, been down there many times. It's your Situation Room deep in the bowels of the White House. Told that Vice President Cheney is in charge there. Condoleezza Rice, who directs the National Security Council, and their chiefs of staff are down there with them, coordinating government responses. And the Situation Room is being run by Vice President Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice, who formerly at Stanford University and now runs the National Security Council, while President Bush returns to Washington, if indeed that is his final destination. Again, let's pause and let the picture speak for itself. The Pentagon, the heart and soul of the U.S. Defense Department, headquarters of the U.S. Defense Department, has never been attacked before. A portion of it is now in flames. We go to Bob Schieffer, our chief Washington correspondent. Bob.
Well, Dan, to give you some sense of just how big that explosion was at the at the Pentagon. Now, I'm about a block north of the White House, some miles from the Pentagon, but as you look over my shoulder and look directly across the old executive office building, you can see there are still these huge clouds of smoke billowing out of the Pentagon. This was
Kennedy, who is chairman of the commission. She said, "Our hearts and prayers go out to the victims of this act of terrorism." She was whisked by motorcade to an unidentified secure location away from the White House, which of course has also been threatened by attack. The White House has been evacuated. We are told she was able to use a secure phone to talk with her husband, the president, who was on his way back from an appearance in Florida. She has also spoken to her 2 daughters to make sure that they are okay. Her twin daughters are at college, and she has been able to assure that they were all right. Vice President Dick Cheney was at the White House at the time the attacks began. He also
to have been involved today. What accommodations are being made for the friends and family of passengers?
That's being handled by the airlines. They're having a meeting now concerning that, so that information has to get from the airlines.
So officially, what are you starting at this point?
We're starting a total evacuation of the airport.
Will that include both workers and passengers?
Only key employees will remain at the airport.
This is the entire airport that will be evacuated?
Yes, ma'am.
Why is the evacuation?
Because the evacuation has been ordered. I can't tell you why, but that's what that's how it stands now.
Is there a security threat to the airport?
It's precautionary at this point.
Have you ever seen anything like this before in Los Angeles?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And what is going to be your role, the police department's role in this? What are you doing?
We're protecting the public. That's what our job is.
Will roads in and out of the airport be closed as well? Will people be able to get into the airport?
Right now, this thing is fluid. We're working as we go with the changes, so I couldn't give you a definite on anything right now.
How many police officers more or less
Thanks very much.
here in the airport on a regular day?
Other agencies involved, I couldn't give you an exact figure.
On the basis of a war, and go on to that footing and use whatever assets and efforts that are necessary to bring those to justice, and at the same time prevent ever a reoccurrence of a tragedy and a crime of this enormity.
Senator, we've been seeing just for the last couple of minutes some live pictures of injured people arriving at a hospital in New York for treatment there. Obviously, it would appear, based on what we know, that the loss of life is going to be very great indeed. Your sense from knowing the Pentagon and knowing the area where that airplane hit, fire still going over there. Do you have any? What can you tell us about that part of the building? Number of people work there, that kind of thing.
Well, as you know, the Pentagon is a very large building, and which may work to our benefit here, as opposed to the trade tower.
Well, will you please tell?
The same thing here in Los Angeles, as well as San Francisco and Washington, D.C.
Very difficult.
We're going to
The fate of those inside the twin skyscrapers, some 110 stories high, not immediately known. Authorities have been trying to evacuate the 50,000 people who worked there, but many were thought to be trapped inside, and there is the second collapse to the ground. And there were firefighters who were on the scene, in the building. They were around the building as it collapsed. Paramedics were there, ambulance workers. Our own reporters on the scene described an ambulance that literally blew up. And the loss of life here is just catastrophic.
And we also heard from Rick Sanchez, who was on the scene. He was with a group of firefighters who had their radios on, and there were people caught in the wreckage of the Twin Towers who were calling for help. There is a massive emergency situation going on, as you would expect, and you can see these pictures from just a little bit earlier from the World Trade Center. Ken Allard, MSNBC military analyst, is on the phone. Can you hear me, Ken?
Yeah, sure can, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes, and let me get your reaction to this. Lawrence Eagleburger, the former Secretary of State, was with us a short time ago. He called this an act of war. Gerald Ford called for quick action. Let me get your response.
Well, Chris, I think that's absolutely right. Driving over here to the studio this morning, I could see the smoke from the Pentagon, a building where I worked for 5 years, and that was the only thought that occurred to me. This is the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. And I don't see any conceivable response to this except to get out of this paradigm that we've had, that this is some problem with the justice system, that this is something that we have to pursue criminal indictments and extradite people. This was an act of war. Osama bin Laden and his group declared that 2 years ago when they attacked our embassies in Africa. And it shows what happens when you don't take the war to him. He takes the war to you, and that's what happened here this morning.
And apparently he issued a warning as recently as just a few weeks ago. Ken, how well prepared are we if we're going to mount a swift and sure response?
Well, Chris, that's going to be the problem. I mean, sitting here right now, I'm having...
The United States was attacked as a...
Turned off, that fire could burn for some time. Stay with us, Jerry. Back to Washington, CNN's Judy Woodruff. Judy, you have more here. What can you tell us?
Well, Aaron, we are monitoring, of course, statements from around the globe, and we've just, in the last few minutes, been able to get a statement from the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan. The Taliban, of course, being the religious organization that is the party controlling the government in Afghanistan. The name Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif said in reaction to the news of these terror attacks in the United States, and I am quoting, "We want to tell the American children that Afghanistan feels your pain, and we hope that the courts find justice." Now, this statement, again, made by a Taliban ambassador to Pakistan, his name, Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif, he made it at a news conference in Islamabad. And I would just add that we're told that at the top of the hour, which would be perhaps 1 o'clock Eastern time, we're expecting a news conference live from Kabul, Afghanistan. That is the capital of Afghanistan, the Taliban being the controlling religious party in that country, Afghanistan being the country where we have every reason to believe Osama bin Laden, the leader of a huge terrorist network, continues to live in hiding. The Taliban has denied his presence there from time to time, but it is believed by those who follow the activities of his organization that he is in Afghanistan. So we will, of course, be watching that. Let me just... All right, Aaron, I want to go back to you now in New York.
Thank you, Judy. We have on the phone with us New York's Mayor, Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, give us your best piece of information as the situation right now.
The situation right now is a massive rescue effort that's going on right now. We're trying to evacuate thousands and thousands of people. We have as many of our police and fire personnel as we have down in the southern part of Manhattan, evacuating people, trying to save as many lives as possible. We've been in communication with Governor Pataki, who's gotten the National Guard ready, and they're going to come in and relieve us a little bit later in the day. And we've spoken to the White House, and the urban search and rescue teams will come here also to assist us. But right now, it's the New York City Police and Fire, EMS, that are down there trying to evacuate as many people as we possibly can, and we've asked everyone to leave Lower Manhattan if they can on their own so that it relieves our efforts. And this will be going on all day. It's a horrible, horrible tragedy.
It is that. Mr. Mayor, can you tell me, is it are people panicking down there, or
no,
are they
people,
leaving?
I was there right in a building that got hit by the debris when the first tower collapsed. So I had to evacuate with people, and we were trapped in the building for a while. And we finally were able to get out, and we all walked north. And people, everything that I observed, even though it was hundreds, maybe in some cases thousands of people that were walking down the street, they were orderly, they were calm, they handled themselves really
and
probably better than anybody had any right to expect.
And Mr. Mayor, we were told one of the problems, and Lord knows there are hundreds of problems, one of the problems was that a large number of police, fire, EMS personnel have also been injured in this. Can you shed any light on that?
I don't even want to contemplate what the number will be. But when the building collapsed, we had a lot of our police officers and firefighters in the building, and I know many of them
because I saw some of them go in because I was there, and I'm praying for them. I just hope they're able to get out.
I think we all are.
The losses to our police department and fire department,
Sir,
are going to be severe.
Do you believe that was there another set of explosions that caused the buildings to collapse, or was it the structural damage caused by the planes?
I don't know. I saw the first collapse and heard the second because I was in a building when the second took place. I think it was structural, but I cannot be sure.
And can you tell us how many hospitals in the city and perhaps outside the city too? All of them.
Right now, at last count, we were utilizing over 50. I think it'll be over 100 by the, and that was as of a half hour ago.
And
we're utilizing all of the hospitals in New York City. We're utilizing the hospitals in Westchester and Rockland, Nassau County, northern New Jersey. And the main thing we have to urge people to do is to be calm and evacuate Lower Manhattan. And as far as the rest of the city is concerned, just to go about their lives as best as possible. I never thought I would see something like this happen. I got there after the first plane hit and before the second, and watching people jump from the top of the World Trade Center is an unbelievable sight.
Mr. Mayor, my colleague Jeff Greenfield is with us also. Jeff?
Mr. Mayor, in terms of, you've already said that you want Lower Manhattan evacuated, you want everybody else to go about their business. Are there specific instructions that you want to communicate right now to police, fire, everybody else?
Well, the police and fire are there, and they're there in large numbers, and they are, first of all, trying to get into the rubble and the debris to save as many people as possible. We also have thousands of police officers in Lower Manhattan, and what we want people to do is to leave Lower Manhattan if they can on their own. Just to walk.
Sorry.
Walk. I just talked to Dick Grasso, who runs the stock exchange, and we have a lot of police there. They have 3,000 people there. We're going to walk them out. We're walking them east and then north, which is essentially the way I walked out. I was right below the World Trade Center when it collapsed, and then we walked up to Greenwich Village. People should walk out of Lower Manhattan, get above Canal Street, for safety reasons, but for a second reason. We need people out of there so we can get thousands of ambulances in and out over the course of the next couple hours. And the fewer people we have there, the more lives we're going to be able to save.
Mr. Mayor, are the subways operating?
The subways are operating outside of Manhattan.
Outside of Manhattan?
Outside of Manhattan, the subways are operating. A couple of delays here and there, but in all other four boroughs, the subways are operating. In Manhattan, there are significant delays. We thought we had the Lexington Avenue open, but it is not. I'm just checking right now. The Lexington Avenue is not open. The A train is working, and people will just have to test and see. The best thing to do right now is to walk. The safest and best thing to do is to walk to your destination. Where schools have remained open, and we've worked with the chancellor to try to make certain that the schools will remain open for as long as they have to help parents with the kids that would be coming home, starting at around 1 or 2 o'clock.
Mr. Mayor, as you know better than anyone, and certainly New Yorkers know, but people around the country perhaps do not, this was election day here. What is the status of the election?
We canceled it. The governor and I decided about an hour and a half ago that it made no sense to have an election today. We needed all those police officers who were at the election site, and we need to focus on rescue. So we'll find another day. We'll find another day for the election. The governor and I made that decision about an hour and a half ago.
Mr. Mayor, you're a very focused guy in moments like this. Is it hard, given the magnitude of what's happened here and around the country, to focus on what you have to do and not just be angry?
It's very hard, and it's very hard because I know some of the people that are there. They're personal friends and close friends who are.
In fact, Mr. Mayor,
who are in the building, and I haven't been able to find out if they're safe yet.
Your emergency command center, what some people have called a bunker, was located, was it not, in one of the World Trade Center buildings?
It was located close enough to it so that it was affected by it. It's not in one of the buildings, but it was located right in that area, as is City Hall, the police department, and all of them had to be evacuated. So that area of Manhattan, once I was in a building at the time that we were using as a command center, and we were trapped in the building for a while, for about 20 minutes, not able to get out different exits that were overcome with smoke and debris.
Mr. Mayor, just as a practical question, do hospitals need help? Do they need
Hospitals need all of the help they can get. We're getting a great deal of help from the surrounding areas. The governor has mobilized the state in order to make hospitals available to us outside of Manhattan. Any hospital personnel or emergency personnel that want to come in and volunteer, that'd be enormously helpful. But the best thing for us to do right now, we're trying to coordinate, is to move people out of the city to hospitals in surrounding areas, which we're actually doing now. But so far, though, our hospital system is we're very fortunate to have a gigantic hospital system.
Do they have enough blood? Do they need blood? Do they need people to come in and help them out?
I'm sure they will. We're getting the National Guard to relieve our people by early to late this afternoon. They're being mobilized now. And 3 urban search and rescue teams are going to come to New York City to help us. And then anyone that wants to volunteer from surrounding areas, volunteer fire departments and others, we're working with them now to do that, to try to relieve our fire department.
Unprecedented attack against U.S. interests. Since that time, they got other information that there may be some sort of attack against U.S. possibly governmental facilities. And then, as we know, on Friday, the State Department did put out a worldwide caution, basically telling U.S. Citizens and also particularly government and military officials that they should be in a heightened state of alert. But I will tell you, from talking to law enforcement sources, I talked to them minutes after the 2 planes rammed into the World Trade Center building this morning, the Twin Towers, that they were very stunned, that they said, look, we had gotten word that there may be some sort of attack, but we had no idea it was going to be on U.S. soil, no idea that it was going to involve airliners and so forth. I will tell you also, law enforcement sources do know that Osama bin Laden, right now, they believe he's sort of the prime suspect. They have no idea who's behind this, but they are looking at him because they do say that he and his men did a lot of training. In fact, where they did practice hijackings, where they did have pilots who were on their staff, and in fact, we had reported earlier that 3 people involved in the East African bombings were actually pilots, and that's sort of part of their training, and they get some of that in Afghanistan, also Iran, and a number of other countries. So this is sort of part of their training to prepare for something like this. But law enforcement sources are telling me, and these are intelligence officials, that they were really stunned by today's development.
All right, Rita, thank you very much. It's worth perhaps also adding to this, John Scott, that the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, is controlling the U.S. aircraft that are in the air, including those that are escorting Air Force One. So you get an idea from that just how seriously this threat is being taken by the U.S. military. Back to you in New York, John Scott.
All right, Britt Hume, thanks very much. This was supposed to be an election day in New York. Primary elections were scheduled for mayor here and other offices. Those elections have been canceled. A couple of other more mundane matters considering all that's gone on. Major League Baseball has canceled its scheduled games for tonight. All those games are canceled. Let's listen to one of the witnesses from Lower Manhattan now recount what he saw. This is unedited tape. All right, we're having a little trouble hearing the audio there. As you can imagine, Wall Street workers, a great number of other people terrifically impacted by the collapse of the World Trade Centers, that after they were hit by 2 apparently hijacked airliners shortly before and shortly after 9 a.m. this morning Eastern Time. Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating is on the line with us once again. Governor, you have had more experience than anybody dealing with catastrophe of this scale in the bombing of the Murrah building. How should America respond?
Well, no one has had experience responding to a catastrophe of this scale. This is just agony beyond comprehension. It is horrific. It really is a day of infamy. And I am confident as a citizen, because I dealt with the New York Police Department and the New York Fire Service here in Oklahoma City, that they have first-rate authorities. Their emergency management people are first-rate. I'm confident in the military authorities and obviously in the President's leadership. But this is just absolutely
Governor, let me interrupt you for just a minute. Britt Hume has some late-breaking information for us out of
John,
Washington.
we've just learned from the White House press pool. That is the group of journalists who stay with the president at all times, fly with him aboard Air Force One, that the president will, in a matter of minutes, be making a statement. There is some mystery about exactly where that statement will come from, whether it will be from Air Force One or some other place where he may have landed. So we await, obviously, with great interest that, but we are within apparently minutes of hearing from the president for the first time since his initial remarks before he got in the air after these attacks originally occurred. So we wait here in Washington to bring that to you as soon as we have a signal from the White House or from wherever the president is.
And almost certainly, Britt, that would not be from the Oval Office. The White House has been evacuated, right?
The White House has been evacuated, and we have no reason to believe that the president's plane has touched down in the Washington area. But communications here are such, John, that all kinds of things could have happened that we don't know about, and indeed that not everybody here on the ground knows about. But the president, of course, travels with the most elaborate communications facility.
And we've just been told that the president will speak shortly from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. Now, we presume the television networks, we should tell you, have agreed to pool resources today as best we all can, so that what is seen on one network will be seen on all. This is not today a competitive business. Today is the business of covering a national tragedy and a national emergency, and the president will have much to say about this when we hear from him. Colin Powell has issued a statement, the Secretary of State. Remember, as I mentioned, he, of course, works out of the State Department where there was a car bomb this morning, and I'm looking for his statement. Here it is. Colin Powell, Dateline, Lima, Peru, Reuters news agency. Secretary of State Colin Powell vowing that terrorism would not crush America or democracy. Cut short his first South American tour Tuesday after massive aircraft attacks in New York and Washington. Quote, "A terrible, terrible tragedy has befallen my nation. Once again, we see terrorism. We see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose." A somber Powell told a meeting of the Organization of American States in Lima, Peru, just now. 22 international flights are currently in the air, are inbound, and frankly, with nowhere else to go, are going to be given clearance to land in the U.S. This is the only allowance that has been granted so far this morning since the airspace over this country was, quote, sanitized, close quote. They were originally diverted to Canada, but the latest update is 22 inbound flights from overseas locales will be allowed to land in this country. We have with us a man who sadly has joined us all too often over the past decade or so when the news we cover involves air tragedies. David Stempler is president of the Air Travelers Association. David, I'm curious, you've been watching the coverage, listening to it along with all of us. Your reaction?
Shocking. It's just hard to believe. It's hard to fathom the extent of this tragedy and this attack on the United States. It's just beyond our comprehension. And it's not the kind of thing, Brian, that we really expected as a threat. I don't think in any of the security meetings I ever attended did anyone discuss the domestic hijacking threat as one where hijackers would take over airplanes and then attack buildings or attack facilities.
David, I want to go to a graphic that our viewers just saw on our air, and let's try to coordinate this while you talk. You can explain what we're seeing. This is from the website Flight Tracker, which every commercial aircraft, every jet aircraft has a transponder, which is then traced by Global Positioning System. This is the American Airlines flight out of Boston. And David, what are we watching here?
Right. This is something I sent over to you. Flight Explorer, which developed this, out in Virginia, sent this over to me. They reconstructed this. This is the flight track of American Airlines flight number 11 as it came out of Boston and was heading on its route to Los Angeles. You'll see 4 lines there. The top line is the airline number, American Airlines flight number 11. The next line, the left number, is the altitude at which the aircraft is at. The right number in that second line is the airspeed. The third line shows the originating point, Boston, and its scheduled destination point, Los Angeles. The last line shows the aircraft type, in this case a Boeing 767-200, and the proposed arrival time in Los Angeles in Eastern Time, at that point 1:49. As we track the airplane out of Boston, it seems to be making a normal departure out of the Boston area. I know your screen shows beyond this at this point. When it gets back to Boston, let's start again. It's coming out of Boston, turns west, going through western Massachusetts, going into upstate New York above Albany, and it makes a very hard left turn there. Now, the folks at Flight Tracker have indicated to me that that plane made that turn at 8:28 a.m., according to the data that they received from the FAA.
Being hit by the second plane, the second tower eventually collapsed after the still trapped. This is new videotape that had not been seen before. Dateline Washington, the Pentagon now.
Before, or apparently around the time of the hijacking, the speed gets very erratic. It goes to 427 knots, drops about 100 knots down to 340 knots. Maybe that's when they were getting control of the airplane. Back up to 470 knots, up to 495 knots, up over 500 knots, 493, 441, 407, 396, 390 knots, and then finally on the last readout, 313 knots. This is quite a dramatic picture, and you know, Brian, that we would have not seen any kind of tracking like this coming out of an NTSB investigation for months and months and months.
That's right, and that's the advantage here. It's ghoulish, but we get to see what happened, and I don't know if people can appreciate how severe a turn that is on an aircraft that big, and to go from 456 to 340 in terms of speed while turning. It must have been an emergency, and of course now we know. David, we'll return to this topic in 1 second. Hold there with me.
Okay.
We're learning the first of the president's comments from, again, he is at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. George W. Bush says the U.S. military is on high alert at home and abroad. And as eerie as it is to have to say this, but we have to say this on a day like today, the president is ensuring Americans that he has taken steps to ensure the functioning of the U.S. government. George W. Bush says freedom itself was attacked and freedom will be protected. Barksdale is near Shreveport, Louisiana, and we're joined, David Stempler, stay with us. We're joined by Bill Arkin, our MSNBC military consultant. Bill, why Barksdale?
Well, Barksdale is an old Strategic Air Command base, which is now the headquarters of the 8th Air Force. It is the closest air facility, and that, for that matter, the closest military base to Florida, where you would have the full command center and the strategic nuclear capabilities of the United States. And I don't mean to raise the nuclear issues, but what you have at Barksdale is all of the communications that would support links to every aspect of the U.S. national security complex.
Bill, you mentioned, of course, the ultimate here, and in trying to get to this studio, I encountered several people who were expressing emotions that have not been heard out loud in this country since the last time the United States was attacked on the day of the Pearl Harbor attack. There is a growing sentiment. You hear it anecdotally. You hear it in the media. Tremendous anger, of course, at whoever has done this. And how long can the military wait? How long will they be willing to wait to make sure the U.S. knows just who it's hitting back here?
Well, I think that there's really not much question as to who is responsible for these attacks. There are not very many terrorist organizations in the world that have the networks and the organization and the finances to put something like this so sophisticated together. So though there are 28 terrorist organizations listed in the State Department's Patterns of Global Terrorism report for 2001, there's really only one organization, Osama bin Laden's organization, Al-Qaeda, which has really the ability to do this, and they also have a long history from 1992 when they targeted U.S. troops in Yemen to the embassy bombings in August 1998, of where they have clearly focused their attention on U.S. targets. The problem is that obviously you don't carry out an attack like this and then sit at home waiting for cruise missiles to arrive. I imagine Osama bin Laden and his command structure have also gone underground as part of this overall attack, as would any terrorist organization, even if it's not the Al-Qaeda group. And so I think that you have two problems in mounting military retaliation. One is that that retaliation itself has to be in accordance with American laws and standards. We can't just attack any terrorist organization and then say that makes us feel better. We have to do something which is both legal and which is proportionate to what has occurred. And then secondly, we have to have a target. There has to be an actual target that is suitable to attack. And I think that as the intelligence establishment now sorts through information and tries to figure out the source of the attack and the locations of those cells which were responsible for this attack, we're going to see probably very swift action, because I can't imagine that the Bush administration is going to respond to this by saying that this is a law enforcement matter.
Bill, when you look at what has happened today, is there any benchmark? Is this the new benchmark for the intelligence failure of all time?
Oh, come on, Brian. The reality here is that we spend $30 billion a year on intelligence, and we do not have a clue. Americans should be absolutely horrified and angry today that our entire airline security system broke down, our entire counterterror organization broke down, and our intelligence establishment was sitting there at 8:59 this morning, probably looking at every country in the world, at every armed force, at every issue, and not focusing their attention on something that they should have had warning about.
This brings us back to David Stempler. David, 4 people, and perhaps more than that, got on 4 commercial flights this morning, diverted them, killed themselves and everyone on board. What does that mean to you? Have we lost David Stempler?
Brian?
Yes, David.
Yes. I don't know how we can assess this at this point. I'll tell you why. What we have and the kind of domestic airline security that we have is really set up to manage a hijacking situation using metal-type weapons, whether it's guns or knives. I talked with a security colleague this morning. What could have happened is you could have put 10, 15, 20 people on this airplane. They could have overpowered any amount of people without any guns or any weapons. But I would assume that what has happened here is that these were not the pilots, the American or United Airlines pilots. I believe that those pilots were taken out somehow.
Right. And
placed in the seats were these terrorist pilots who actually focused on these buildings. So I don't know how you deal with that kind of threat assessment at this point.
It's been theorized that because of just how these planes acted today, that it would have taken more, even than someone with a gun to the head of the pilot, to make a commercial airline pilot aim for and blow through, for starters, one of the 2 towers of the Twin Towers in New York, that they had to be overpowered and replaced, and that adds yet another dimension to what we're covering here today, that these hijackers were perhaps, some would say, were likely trained commercial airline pilots, and flying aircraft the size we're talking about today is not a skill possessed by every person walking around the face of the earth. These are the aircraft we're talking about today. The enormity of this just occurring to every American, all of us. No one has the advantage here of having a leg up on just what this means. We're talking about any one of these stories would be a complete disaster on any day when when isolated, they have all happened on the same day. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to LAX. American Airlines Flight 77, Dulles to LAX. United Airlines Flight 175, Boston, LAX. That's the flight we've been watching. United Airlines Flight 93, Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. We have a commercial airliner down in a small airport outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. An earlier report that an aircraft had crashed into Camp David has now been put down. This is a picture of the wreckage near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We also cannot forget that the most crushing human drama is taking place at this hour in the city of New York, where I think it can be said conservatively that the number of deaths will end up in the hundreds and thousands. The New York City mayor has indicated so much in his comments. Our own Monica Novotny is at St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village, where they are getting a huge share of the casualties in this. Monica, what can you tell us?
Well, Brian, St. Vincent's Hospital is one of the two main trauma centers in the area where victims are being taken. A spokesman came out just a few moments ago. These are the numbers that he gave us so far. 184 patients brought in. 10 of those are in critical condition. The good news is that all are alive, being cared for. However, among them, many firefighters, NYPD, one EMT worker. This also, I should point out, was a few minutes ago, and I have to say that the stream of ambulances has been steady, so I can safely say that that number is certainly well over 200 at this point. The injuries range, they say, from minor smoke inhalation to more serious debris inhalation. Also, they're seeing burns, broken bones, shock, and multiple traumas. 3 of the victims who had come in so far had coronary difficulty. We also want to tell you about the scene just outside the hospital. I've spent the morning here, and I can tell you that they have had dozens of hospital workers lining the front entrance of the hospital, which is about a block long, and they have been there all morning waiting with stretchers and wheelchairs. Now, at this point, they seem to have run out of most of that equipment, so they've actually brought down office chairs that they're just draping in white sheets to carry the victims back into the hospital as they come out of those ambulances. The ambulances are in unbelievable condition themselves. You can just imagine what the scene must look like down at the World Trade Center, because as those ambulances come in, they are completely covered, some in an inch of dust. On top, the firefighters and the emergency workers themselves are completely covered in soot. They are certainly the heroes here. Many of them we see drop off the boat. They look exhausted themselves already, but they continue to get back in and roll out to continue the work. We also want to tell you they are stressing the need for blood throughout New York City. Many people spent the morning coming down here because they heard about St. Vincent's through the media. There are, in fact, hundreds of New Yorkers online. They have now set up makeshift signs actually designating blood types around the block, and folks are standing in packs on lines there based on their blood type. But at this point, obviously, the trauma center is so focused on the victims that they can no longer take any more blood, although they say they are desperate for it. So New York City is trying to arrange buses to actually carry these people to other facilities so that they can donate that blood. But they do continue to ask people in the area to come and donate blood to whatever the nearest facility is to them. Also, they're asking doctors in the area who are off duty at this point to stay off duty, and they want them to call in or volunteer later this evening, because they say that's when they expect that there will be so many more victims and that they'll need another shift to recover the doctors that are working now. At St. Vincent's now, there are 500 physicians and nurses working. They've described the scene inside the hospital among the doctors and nurses as controlled professional.
If it were to happen, if there were to be attacks, what would the implications be of
at war? When you have a free and open country as we do, we are vulnerable to this sort of thing, and it is the face of this term that people have been talking about for several years of asymmetric warfare, and it is a way of getting at us, the most powerful military nation in the world, in ways in which we're vulnerable.
Sir, we heard, and perhaps it's given our proximity to the events, it's a little bit unseemly, but we heard a member of Congress but a few minutes ago essentially say that the American government failed its people. Is it fair to say that this is a failure, or we can't know it all?
Well, personally, I believe that for people to start blaming people and organizations at this point is highly premature. I think that we need to find out just exactly how bad this situation is and deal with it. The idea of starting to cast blame within hours of something having happened is in fact unseemly.
And Ambassador Holbrooke, does the United States in a situation like this go it alone, or does it gather the international community together as one, or as much of one as it can, and try and respond in that form?
Well, first of all, let me say that at this moment, we have to find out what happened down there. I used to work in that building and was there when it was attacked a few years ago. I know that area. My assistant has a cousin who's now missing in the building, and my thoughts are first for the enormous, unbelievable loss of life and tragedy that's going on in Lower Manhattan. Beyond that, Aaron, on your question, this requires a unified international response by all the key member states of the world community, including, very importantly, Russia. And as for the interview you just broadcast by the foreign minister from the Taliban, let's be clear on his attempts to disassociate himself from Osama bin Laden. We don't know at this point who did this, but it was well coordinated and done with a degree of skill which exceeds anything. I think Bob Gates will know better than me, but I think, Bob, this is the most skillful, murderous attack ever in terms of coordination. And I want to be very clear on this. Bin Laden himself, as you just suggested, Bin Laden has said that the Taliban leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar, is the true spiritual leader of the Muslim world. He said that Afghanistan is the purified Islamic State equivalent to Mecca and Medina. And in a tape that the New York Times wrote about 2 days ago, he urged Muslims everywhere, and I'm quoting the New York Times, to migrate to Afghanistan to support the Taliban, saying it's their duty to God, and saying there's now finally a Muslim state that destroys falsehoods and does not succumb to the American infidel and is led by the true believer, Mullah Muhammad Omar, and so on and so forth. So what I want to stress here is that any nation, and this goes for the Taliban and their henchmen in Afghanistan, any nation in the world that harbored anyone associated with this must be treated as though they were part of what is effectively an act of war against the United States. And they cannot hide behind the traditional definitions of difficulty. In the past, we've tried to get Osama bin Laden. He's evaded capture. He almost got killed by a bombing raid 2 or 3 years ago. And I think starting with Afghanistan, we're going to have to hold everyone accountable on the who might have sheltered anyone associated with this act.
So we don't simply, in this conversation, we don't simply hold the group itself, whoever it is, the group itself accountable. We hold anyone accountable, any country, any government accountable if they did nothing to stop it.
Any country which shelters, evades, or helps these people and their cohorts evade capture and the retribution they deserve is, in my view, functionally culpable of the events that took place in New York and Washington and elsewhere today, and must be so warned. I'm not accusing the Taliban specifically at this point because we don't know who did it.
Correct.
But all the evidence points to a connection between Osama bin Laden and Taliban leaders, and an attempt on the Taliban's part to, as the New York Times put it 2 days before this attack, call it as a ploy. And that is a quote from the New York Times before this happened. So I just want to underscore again, we are going to need the support of all our allies in Europe, the Russians, the Chinese, and any other country that might have in the past flirted with playing both sides of the street. Nothing like this has happened in American history. The full dimensions of it are still not clear to anyone, but I think we all can imagine it's going to be heart-wrenching in its dimensions as it becomes fully apparent, and we're not going to be able to leave countries playing two sides here. And I'm sure my friend Bob Gates would not disagree with that.
Let me, Mr. Gates, I want to come back to you. Mr. Holbrooke, stay with us for a minute. I believe now we have the president. This is the president on tape a few moments ago.
I'm sorry, folks. It appears there we saw the president start to come in. That, of course, was videotape, and that was a raw tape feed.
We'll show you that the tape is coming in again, and we'll hope that this time we have audio and can hear the president. Well, here we have a second pass. No luck.
This is coming to us from the broadcast.
A defensive attack deterrent in the form of chaff that can lead missiles astray. Let's listen again.
Itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
George W. Bush speaking from Barksdale Air Force Base, a secure location near Shreveport, Louisiana. And he is trying to reassure Americans that their government is up and running, that they themselves will be safe, and he called what happened today an act of cowardice. These are the times when presidents are tested, make no doubt about it. This is the largest crisis that any American president has had to deal with since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, obviously, and this will be a time when Americans will make a very firm, gut-level decision during this day, into tonight, and on into tomorrow and the days that come, as to the capability of President George W. Bush, as he will receive the support of the American people, almost reflexively rallying around the chief executive, as has been the case anytime tragedy has struck the United States. Tragedy has not struck this country like this since Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Let's listen now to some of those who witnessed what happened today in New York.
I heard a very low plane, which usually does happen, but when I looked up, it was like I was actually gliding with it, and I saw it actually went straight into one of the Twin Towers. It was like it was it sunk right into the floor. It disintegrated instantly.
Can you tell us what kind of an airplane it was?
It looked like a huge 747. It was a big airline. It wasn't a small jet. It was a big carrier.
And you couldn't see anybody? Could you see a pilot or any such thing?
No, I actually was. It was like side by side. It was like I was right behind it. It was huge. I couldn't believe how low it was. I was telling my roommate, this plane is very low. And I actually saw it go straight into the Twin Towers. Like, why is he going into the building? It was like it was almost deliberately glided into the building.
Elena, where exactly do you live? Where did you see this from? Battery Park City?
No, I'm in the East Village on 13th Street.
And you then saw the plane go into the building, and I assume you saw the resulting...
You better believe it. I saw an explosion like I have never seen, and all I can say is those people, I don't know, but they're all definitely disintegrated. It was the most awful thing I've ever seen.
You could hear the rumbling. When you looked up, you could see the top of the building just fumbling. We all headed south, and you could feel the wind hitting in the back because as the debris hit.
Really?
I just dove under a truck. Got buried in there about 45 minutes. Eventually dug my way out. And you couldn't see. For blocks. I must have walked 6 blocks down.
Okay, thanks.
I work at the Port Authority bus terminal. We got the call immediately. We heard it. We piled in our cars. We came down to the World Trade Center. We started to help evacuation. As we were evacuating number 1, I don't know what happened. I was on the terrace, which is ground level, and all of a sudden we heard the building starting to come down. And the next thing I know, I was holding on to my commanding officer, and we found ourselves on West Street. How we got out of the building, I thought I was gone. And then we were trying to get people away when the second collapse occurred, and I dove under a truck. So I don't know how I'm here.
Did you help get people out?
Yes, we got many people out, yes.
What was happening with them?
We had an orderly evacuation. There were bodies coming down, but I think they were from the aircraft. I still don't know really what happened.
Okay. All right. Now we have reports of people jumping out windows. And
that happened.
Tell me.
But we don't know why or how, but there were people falling out of the sky.
How did you get back here alive?
I don't know.
I mean, did you bring an ambulance down? Or?
No, we walked out. Myself, my commanding officer, and one other police officer. We helped each other out, and then we carried a bunch of people that we found laying in the debris. There was complete darkness. We stumbled over some people. We picked them up and carried them across the street.
Now, I can't see which floors they are, but
I can't see either. My eyes are all cluttered up. I have to go. I'm going to hang in as long as I can.
I was standing on the roof of the Woolworth building on the 56th floor looking out the tower to see what happened, and the next thing I did, I seen a spot in the air. Another plane came down and circled. I kind of went off a little bit, and then it straightened itself out and dove to the other side and crashed right in. An explosion was so terrific it looked like it had dynamite in it. The ball of fire that came flying out of that one was even worse than the first one. And we were standing there, and I said, I can't believe this. And sure enough, there it was, another plane. The plane wasn't no airline or anything. It was a twin-engine, big gray plane.
And it was indeed, we've now learned, a commercial airliner. Precisely that. And let's not forget, the aircraft that hit the World Trade Center were loaded with fuel. This had been the start and not the tail end of their flight. Some of them loaded with fuel for transcontinental air travel, which can reach into the tens of thousands of pounds. Both wings, much of the fuselage, laden with fuel. These are the commercial airliners that are down. Again, any one of these flights, obviously, painfully obviously, would be a huge tragedy on any other day. Today, in the midst of all these attacks on American targets, we are talking about 4 commercial airline flights down. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston LAX, American Flight 77, Dulles LAX, United 175, Boston LAX, United 93, Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. There will be so much discussion coming out of this today, and this is just one of those flights. Look at the severe turn it takes. This was the American Boston LAX flight. Everything was going well. This even gives us, this Flight Explorer website gives us airspeed, altitude. They were exactly where they were supposed to be for a flight out of Boston, headed on a transcontinental route, when they took this sudden turn, heading to the city of New York. And as far as the passengers knew, well, they did not know what their destination would be, only apparently that they had been hijacked. We have so much information we've yet to gather today. Communication, perhaps, between the towers and the TRACON regional flight controllers in this country, the towers at regional airports. We have a lot we don't know. Was there contact? Were all the pilots overpowered and replaced with terrorist pilots in the cockpits of these commercial flights? The sight of a commercial airliner running into the second of two twin towers in New York, beyond extraordinary, beyond horrifying. That is why the death toll in New York at this hour is believed to be measured in the thousands. We will be hearing from New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani in the next few minutes, a press conference we will bring to you live. Before then, let me go to my colleague Rick Sanchez, who all morning long has been reporting from Lower Manhattan. Rick, set the scene for us.
Right now, this is what it looks like down here, Brian. A lot of soot, a lot of ash. The closer you get to the area, the thicker it gets. A very difficult task for firefighters and some of the rescue workers who are just now starting to make their way into the rubble. They have called out all the local unions in this area. I've seen and spoken to the stagehands union, iron workers, all of them heading into the area in row with pickaxes and chainsaws. They have been waiting some time to finally go into that area to see if they can possibly extricate some of the people who may still be stuck in there. Firefighters are obviously going in with a heavy heart. Every one that I've spoken to says, those are my brothers down there, those are my colleagues. So that's their task at hand right now as they move into that area. There is also a medical triage center that has been opened over at Chelsea Piers. Originally, they had plans to have it over near the high school, but now it's been moved several blocks away as well. The situation here obviously very tense. A lot of people extremely emotional about what's going on.
Rick Sanchez, thank you for that report from New York. And for those of our viewers not in the New York metropolitan area, words almost don't do the job in describing this city in complete emergency today. There were people streaming into the streets. All they knew is they should walk north, and walk they did along venues and avenues like the West Side Highway in New York. They were being chased in some instances by this plume of dust that occurred not once but twice with the collapse of both of the towers in order of the World Trade Center. There were people praying on street corners in New York, trying to make cell phone calls, not knowing that the cell phone system had long since collapsed under its own weight and because of the outage of communications. There were people obviously walking around dazed, stunned, crying. People in New York all morning have been trying to get to their children, ensure their safety. New York City schools saying the children will indeed be safe and can only go home with a parent or legal guardian. This has brought families not only, of course, in front of their television sets, as few American tragedies have, but this has sent parents scurrying to check on the safety of their children. And the most horrifying aspect of it, perhaps, was that period of several hours this morning where we didn't know what would be struck next. I don't suppose it is fair to say that any threat has passed either at this hour, given what we have seen unfold in this nation so far today. And this is part of what we're talking about. Earlier today, 2 Navy FA-18s were seen coming down the Hudson River on patrol. This is a live picture. This is from the roof of this television network. Right now, a swept-wing U.S. Navy jet fighter is in the skies over the city of New York. In a free nation, this is not a sight people are used to. Chris Jansing, what are you seeing up on the roof?
Well, the first thing that happened, Brian, was that obviously we heard a plane overhead, and you start because of what happened earlier today. But it's almost eerie up here on the roof because we're not far. We're probably only about 10 miles southwest of us is Newark International Airport. We're used to hearing and seeing planes in a flight path over in this direction. All throughout the day, we see the planes coming and going. Today, an eerie silence, and then suddenly we saw those surveillance planes in the sky over metropolitan New York. We are being told that at Newark International Airport, which of course is where one of those ill-fated planes, the United Airlines Flight 93, left from, at about 8 o'clock this morning, there are heavily armed guards. They are guarding the Port Authority offices. That's what controls Newark International Airport. They are also controlling the air traffic control tower there. We are told that those officers are on a high state of alert and they are carrying guns. Obviously, Newark, one of 3 airports here in the metropolitan area that is now shut down. And if we go back over in this direction and take the shot over my shoulder, you can see, even though we're probably a good 8 miles away from the World Trade Center, you can see the smoke that continues to billow out of lower Manhattan. We've been watching it over the course of the last 45 minutes or so. It's been changing from white to gray to black. And to give you an idea of the enormity of the disaster that has occurred in New York, hospitals all throughout New Jersey are on alert. In Hoboken, which is right across the Hudson River from what you're seeing right now at the World Trade Center, 12 people brought to the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital, 30 more to the ER at Christ Hospital. St. Francis Hospital in Jersey City, not far from there, has taken another 20 people. And as far away as an hour from New York City, a hospital called the Robert Wood Johnson Trauma Center, that is in New Brunswick. They have doctors and nurses coming into their trauma center. They are on a state of alert. They have been told to prepare for at least 50 of the injured to come in. Now, obviously, the people who are being brought here over the river are not among the most seriously injured, although many of them have some pretty severe respiratory problems. None of their injuries is considered life-threatening. In addition, at the PATH station in Hoboken, again, directly across the river from Manhattan, there's been a triage center set up. So that's where some of the people are being brought. They're being assessed. Those who can be treated on the scene are being treated on the scene. Others are being sent to these hospitals that are on alert throughout New Jersey. Brian?
Chris Jansing, thank you from the area where this network is located. And by the way, you are watching continuing NBC News coverage here on MSNBC live throughout the day of the tragedy, the series of attacks that has taken place here in the United States today. President Carter has put out a statement calling for Americans to rally around the current president, Mr. Bush. Mr. Bush has spoken to cameras and is now on the move once again from Barksdale Air Force Base, apparently in Louisiana. And how often have we ever said this about an American president? Again, reminiscent of Dallas in 1963. His destination is unknown. The news media are not being told where Air Force One will head next. No doubt the Secret Service and the military are trying to decide the next best secure location. The Vice President and First Lady were removed by the Secret Service and taken to a secure location earlier today, as were congressional leaders, as a complete atmosphere of crisis enveloped much of the East Coast. The 2 important and large cities involved in this attack, of course, today, New York and Washington, D.C. We are joined by a witness who saw the second aircraft hit the World Trade Center towers today, Robert Harper of New York. Mr. Harper, tell me what you saw and experienced.
Yeah, good afternoon, Brian. I'm outside of the Metropolitan Hospital. I've just been released for some of the trauma associated with the smoke inhalation, and I was down below the World Trade Center when you could see the second plane circle around after the first initial blast from the first plane, and then the other plane, people were sitting around looking up. You could see, that the first plane hit there, so people were going around trying to do whatever they could. You saw people jumping out of the 78th, 80th floor window of the World Trade Center, and then the second plane crashed into it and exploded into a ball of fire. sending debris, and everybody just began running. I started running toward the mayor's office at that point because there was debris flying everywhere. People didn't expect that to happen. People didn't understand why the plane circled the World Trade Center at that point and then just crashed right into it.
What was happening? Tell us about the scene on the streets. We were talking about people crying in the streets, praying, running through the streets of this city of New York.
Yeah, Brian, it was a complete nightmare. I mean, you saw thousands of businessmen in suits running away from the scene, people that were trying to help one another, people rallying around, victims that were on the ground. And then by the time the second plane actually hit the building, that plane exploded into the building, and the second World Trade Center exploded, and then there was debris coming down everyone. Everybody began to run immediately, and there had been some ambulances that had come to the scene, within minutes of the first accident and or the first plane hitting the building. And so those people were all put in jeopardy because they were congregated down below the building. And then when the plane hit the second building, everybody below was put in jeopardy again. So it's very clear that this was well orchestrated. It was timed so that there would be the most number of casualties. There was, lots of people on the scene. The New York City marshals and police department responded very quickly to this, so they were all down at the bottom of the building. And then, the other plane and all the other debris came down. Within about 20 minutes after that, there was some feeling that they weren't sure if the other World Trade Center would continue to stand. And then about 30 minutes after that, as we were being treated on the side of the streets, they said, get up and run because now the building itself was actually going to fall. And at that point, I was closer to the building that was located not too far from that. It was the Woolworth building, and they thought that one of the World Trade Centers would fall and hit the Woolworth building, and that was immediately in front of the mayor's office. And so everybody just began to run. There was black smoke. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Everybody was covered in a complete complete soot, black everywhere. There are people, running across the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, afraid that if the Woolworth building were hit by one of the other falling World Trade Centers, that triple domino effect, would end up killing even more people.
Robert Harper, thank you very much for that firsthand account of the grisly scene in Lower Manhattan today. We have a few items here. We've been searching for why this date, why today. This date coincides with the start of the Camp David peace talks during the Carter administration. This date also coincides with the event involving Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, who reached an agreement at the White House during the first Clinton term, now 8 years ago. The famous speech, the now long since assassinated Mr. Rabin, talking about his beloved land of milk and honey in Israel. But those are two dates that stand out. There is a Reuters news agency report. We're going to be very careful here because this is a nation anxious to point a finger of blame, anxious to have a villain by name per se. It's a Reuters report that is quoting an unnamed U.S. official saying some indications, reading this verbatim, people with bin Laden links behind attacks. Again, here's the quote. U.S. official says some indications people with bin Laden links behind attacks. We hesitate to pass this along. It is early. It is sketchy. Obviously, many people zeroing in, as did at least one of our on-air analysts earlier today in our programming, on Osama bin Laden, the best known, some would argue the best equipped of the major terrorists and leader of cells out there, with whom the U.S. has had much history. The bombing of the warship Cole overseas most recently comes to mind. It wouldn't hurt to repeat some facts about the World Trade Center at this point. We have this new live shot of Lower Manhattan, Woolworth building there on the left. Who would have thought it would be the tallest structure left in Lower Manhattan this afternoon? 50,000 people work in the two World Trade Center towers. I said this earlier, bears repeating, there are more telephone exchanges in just those two buildings than there are in the entire city of Detroit, Michigan. They were completed in 1976, 110 floors each. At least one New York television station went immediately off the air when the plane hit, because the broadcasting tower still services several stations, radio and television, from the top of the World Trade Center. That is, of course, no more. Stations will have to, locally in New York, go back to using the Empire State Building, perhaps. 43,000 windows in the structures, 99 elevators, 1,350 feet tall. For a good long while, they were the tallest structures in the world before being surpassed out in Chicago. Our own Ashley Banfield is in Lower Manhattan and joins us live to set the scene there. Ashley?
Brian, I'm talking with Anthony. He's just telling me the story of what happened to him. He's looking for his brother at this time. You were in the South Tower, and your brother works in the North Tower. And what if emergency personnel told you? How are you trying to locate your brother?
He could be anywhere right now. And we went to Beekman, or the old Beekman. Now we're on our way to St. Vincent's Hospital.
Did they send you to St. Vincent's Hospital to try to look for lists, or what did they do?
There's no list. No one answers the phones. Nothing. Nothing at all. So we're going to walk there. My mom is waiting, and I'm going to take her to St. Vincent's.
What did you see in the epicenter when you came out of that explosion?
People. I seen people falling. When the second explosion came, I was on the 44th floor walking from one elevator bank to the stairway, and that's when the plane hit, and all the elevator banks blew. And I went down, and people got hit with pieces of glass. And that's right after they announced that, right before that, they announced number 2 building is secure. We can go back to work. And as soon as they said that, that's when the second plane hit. And we started running down the steps. And
you've not been able to call your brother's cell phone, your mother as well?
My mother's over there right now.
All right, 877 Red Cross, good luck to you. And I wish, it's Jimmy, right? Your brother's Jimmy?
Yeah, his brother's name's Jimmy.
Good luck to you. This is some of the kinds of stories that we've been hearing since this happened. Brian, there is so much mayhem and so much bedlam that a lot of the police and emergency response crews have only just been able to try to secure the areas, let alone deal with so many of these casualties. I've heard the term walking casualties. We're just allowing the walking casualties to go to staging areas. I've been told there are 4 different staging areas, the largest of which is over at Chelsea Piers, which is on the Hudson River, on the west side of Manhattan Island. If you want to look past me with the camera here, you can still see the immense amounts of smoke all the way down. We've been pushed about 3 different times out of locations, moved northward from that vicinity. At the very start of the day when this happened, we were right in the epicenter where the explosion was. I'm right now covered in the debris and the dust from the explosion itself. I was hit with a cloud of debris and smoke. A producer I was working with, we at first had to kick in a door to an apartment building just to escape the cloud, because we couldn't breathe, and a police officer followed us in because he couldn't breathe, and a security guard followed us in because he couldn't breathe either. It was pitch black, and now it's just trying to establish whether it's safe enough to even get the crews into this epicenter to rescue those who might still be there, like Anthony's brother Jimmy. He says he can't find him. He has no idea where to even look for him. He was in the first tower. The other thing I want to tell you about is just earlier, this is a sort of an emergency route. They've cordoned it off, and they're allowing a lot of the emergency vehicles to run north and south through here. We saw a caravan of 5 trucks, all with medical supplies, coming right past us and heading down towards the epicenter. Again, the concern is getting those things in there. If you want to just pan up, I don't know if you can see past me, let me get out of the way. Pan up to that big brown building where you can see most of the smoke. That is 7 World Trade Center. Apparently on the south side, that's the side that's not facing us, it's about halfway up. It's still burning pretty badly because it was rocked with a lot of the explosion from the force of the twin World Trade Centers when they came down. A large concern is what's going to happen with that brown building now, which is why we keep getting moved further and further north. You can see people down on the street moving towards us, even media who originally were allowed to have more free reign to report this story. We're being pushed out as well because there was some concern that there might be additional explosions, possibly other bombs. There was also some talk about gas, whether that was a gas explosion, a gas bomb, or perhaps just Con Ed's difficulties in dealing with some of the natural gas here. We're not sure yet. It's very, very difficult to get the emergency crews to give us this information because obviously they've got a very big problem on their hands, just trying to get people out of here and then of course deal with not only those who are still trapped possibly, but those who are injured. Apparently down this street here, And we're on West Broadway and Worth Street. There's another staging area where some of the victims are being taken as well. Ambulances have been coming and going, and we've seen a lot of city buses. We've seen Port Authority. We've seen just about any kind of organization getting involved in this tragedy to help out. Port Authority workers serving as traffic police. We've seen New Jersey police officers and fire and rescue teams coming in as well. We've been told that every county surrounding the New York area, as well as the surrounding states, have sent in emergency crews as well. Let me hear what they're saying. Sir, what's the situation at this time? Do we know anything more about other bombs?
Right now, we don't know anything right now.
And where are you being told to move people?
Yes, we are. I'm telling everybody because right now we're worried about third building right now.
You're worried about which building?
Third building, which might be the American Express building.
Is it this brown building right here?
I don't know if it's the other side of the brown building right now.
And what's the concern with it? It's, we've heard it's on fire on the other side?
Fire on the other side, which might cause the building itself to fall over and knock that building down. We also have to worry about the gas leaks and everything.
Gas leaks. Now, what about the emergency personnel who are on the scene? Are they safe? Are they still trying to tend to the wounded? Or are you getting all the emergency personnel out of the epicenter?
Basically, what you hear is what we hear also. Right now, nobody's told us anything.
And are you serving as traffic now, just trying to keep people out?
Clear people out. God forbid something happens. We don't want nobody, no more injuries or whatever.
Yeah. And how about your fellow officers? Do you know other fellow officers who were in there?
No, we don't. No, we don't. Right now, we're in the dark just like you are.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate it. There you go. I think that's probably best reported right from the officer's mouth. They're in the dark too, and that's what I've been hearing from almost every police officer that I've stopped to talk to. Brian, tell me anything, and they're told all I know is what I'm being told, to move people.
All right, Ashley Banfield, thank you for that live report from Lower Manhattan, just blocks away from where the explosions took place after, again, both World Trade Center towers struck by hijacked commercial aircraft earlier today. Now, as you heard, the concern has to do with the American Express building. We're talking about the area down by the World Financial Center in Lower Manhattan. You see in the foreground the building with the four-sided green top. That is the American Express headquarters, one of two buildings that went up really during the run-up of the 80s of Wall Street, back when names like Shearson Lehman really ran things in Lower Manhattan, and the World Financial Center went up there. Across the street, so to speak, from the World Trade Center, the Trade Center towers collapsed in on themselves, and for that, we are fortunate. Thousands of New Yorkers are fortunate, but thousands have not made it, it is guessed today. People whose only sin was showing up for work this morning will not come home tonight. This is new videotape of the collapse of one of the towers at the World Trade Center. Just into us. Ashley mentioned that one of the staging areas, one of the triage areas, is nearby a relatively new structure called Chelsea Piers in the Chelsea section of New York, a converted a commercial shipping pier. NBC News producer Alice Rhee is there and is with us on the phone. Alice, what's going on there?
Brian, I've been here for about the past hour. The initial staging ground was at about Hudson and West Broadway. We were told, I was with an EMT worker, and we were told that we needed to evacuate very quickly. There was concern about a gas leak, and then there was a concern that a building just a block away from us might collapse. The whole front of the building no longer existed. I'm now told that this is the new staging ground for the EMT and the fire department. The fire department's physician that I spoke with indicated they are setting up a makeshift ER off of the Chelsea Piers here, where cardiologists and surgeons and doctors have come to provide care. I'm also looking at about 100 ambulances all lined up in a queue, ambulances that have come in from all over the city to be in line and waiting for the call from the fire department supervisor who is dispatching ambulances on the site here.
Alice, thank you for that, and we are constantly trying to update folks here. It would be good to point out the enormity of what we have seen happen. We have seen two commercial jetliners crash into the towers of the World Trade Center in New York. Look at the aftermath. This looks like the aftermath.
I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American president President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Condemnation and commiserations, too, from Israel in messages to the United States administration. Israel has banned all non-El Al flights coming into the country as a security precaution, and certainly the events in the U.S. being watched very, very closely from this region. Aaron.
Mike, just a couple of things briefly. One is it is hard, and I suspect for many of our viewers, to look at the tape of the celebration in that you just showed us and contrast those scenes with what we have seen from here in New York and in Washington. The utter devastation, the fear on people's faces, the death and injuries that we know have taken place. The contrasting pictures are extraordinary. Is the Israeli military on a high state of alert now?
Yes, very much so. There is a high state of alert throughout this area. The context that one must view those demonstrations in, those celebrations as we're seen in Palestinian streets, is a context of an area in which violence has been ongoing for nearly 12 months. The context, too, that some Palestinians have criticized the United States sharply for what is seen as its support of Israel in this ongoing conflict. And certainly the Palestinian leadership has been very quick to disassociate itself from those images on the ground, making quite clear that it condemns in the strongest of terms the events in the United States. All radical Palestinian groups, too, have disassociated themselves and denied any responsibility for the United States attacks. Aaron?
Mike, thank you. CNN's Mike Hanna, our Jerusalem bureau chief, where it's about 11:15 in Israel, about 3:45 here in New York. Hospitals here continue to be inundated with the injured, the most serious of the injured being treated first in a classic triage operation. Maria Hinojosa is at St. Vincent Hospital. She joins us on the phone. Maria, what are you seeing and what are you hearing?
Well, Aaron, since about 10 o'clock this morning, there's been a steady stream of ambulances coming into St. Vincent's, which is the central hospital for the traumatized, where they're dealing with the trauma units here. Now, what we've seen, the most recent numbers now, there's 256 patients. 25 of them are in critical condition. 3 of them have passed away. And about 30 firefighters and police have also been treated. Just to give you an idea of the numbers, this hospital handled the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. There they saw a total of only 160 patients. They are now having well surpassed that by 100 patients, more or less, 256 patients now. Mayor Giuliani arrived here about 5 minutes ago. He went straight inside. We're expecting him to come out and address the media here. And essentially there's a sea of green. Office chairs have been draped with white sheets to be used instead of stretchers. Buses have been ferrying hundreds of volunteers who have come to donate blood. They've been taken to other locations. And just about 2 minutes ago, we saw another busload carrying doctors and nurses who have come off. Lots of doctors and nurses coming to St. Vincent's wanting to volunteer. People here saying that they're asking them to come later tonight, where they're expected to be receiving patients well into the night for the next 24 hours at least. Aaron?
Maria, thank you. A snapshot of what is going on in any number of hospitals here in the city of New York and in the New York region, in the counties surrounding New York. This is all being played out in very much the same way. Another snapshot, if you will. CNN producer Alec Mirren is in a car in New Jersey trying to make his way to us here in the city. Alec, can you hear me?
I can, Aaron.
Tell me what is out there right now. How far are you from Manhattan?
Well, I've been traveling from suburban Maryland today, trying to come up, like you said, to assist in the coverage. And it's eerie how these events are impacting travel all along the Northeast Corridor. As you know, a very busy commuter area. Went to the train station in Baltimore this morning. The trains have just been canceled. People were forming carpools to get where they needed to go. As I jumped in my car and headed north on Interstate 95 and then onto the New Jersey Turnpike, lots of signs, serious problems, avoid New York. On the New Jersey Turnpike, I don't know if this is unprecedented, but it's certainly unusual. Everyone was funneled off of the turnpike at exit 11, which is Perth Amboy. Ironically, as you get off there, you could see the cloud of smoke still billowing out of the World Trade Center. Lots of people have just pulled over to the side of the road and are sort of sitting there. Some have gotten binoculars from who knows where. I talked to a few of them. They said they didn't know where they were going to go because the turnpike was closed. I just got here to the train station because reports had been that perhaps train service was starting up again. In fact, it is starting leaving the city, and they made that announcement, which was greeted by smiles and quiet nods of the head from people who are clearly waiting for loved ones to come out of New York City. But there's still no service into New York City, and the island remains pretty much an island. I talked to Woodbridge.
Alec, let me stop you there. Thank you for the snapshot. Keep working your way here. We could use the help. Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy, what do you got?
Aaron, joining us now, our congressional correspondent Kate Snow for an update on what some members of Congress have been doing. We know they've been evacuated from the Capitol building, but Kate, you've been learning about some of their assessment of what's happened. I'm sorry, we don't have that audio connection with Kate. I can report that sources are telling CNN's national security correspondent David Ensor that there are, quote, good indications that people with links to the Osama bin Laden organization are responsible for today's attacks. We can't do much better right now at identifying these sources, but again, they're saying good indications. And this is, again, no proof, but this is very much in line with what high-ranking people have been telling us throughout this day, all the way from former NATO Commander Wesley Clark. General Wesley Clark told us hours ago, and then again just a few moments ago, we spoke with him just a few moments ago. He said that there are very few organizations that would have the sophistication, the financial resources, the organization, the network of contacts to carry out an attack this sophisticated, this organized, where you have planes hitting these key locations in New York City and Washington, the Pentagon, within just minutes of one another. People who could take over the cockpit of an airplane and presumably push the pilot aside. We can't imagine that any pilot would knowingly fly an airplane into the Pentagon or into any place where there were people. Some of these people with connections to the terrorist organizations must have been at the cockpit. Joining us now, and I believe he is in a studio, George Terwilliger, who has had a career of following the activities of intelligence organization, has become an expert on terrorist activities. I'm sorry, we're not going to go to George Terwilliger. We're going to go to White House spokeswoman, Counselor Karen Hughes in Omaha.
And I'm here to update you all on the activities of the federal government in response to this morning's attacks on our country. As you heard from President Bush a short time ago, the federal government is acting to help local communities with search and rescue and emergency management operations, to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens, and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his Cabinet and National Security Team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
Karen, how will the President stay in Nebraska?
Return to the White House?
Will he go back to Washington, Karen? Will he address the nation? If the Vice President can stand...
Presidential Counselor Karen Hughes in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters of the FBI talking to reporters, and very unusual. She did not take questions, which normally would be the case for someone speaking in a spokesperson's capacity. But what we heard from Ms. Hughes is that all appropriate precautions are being taken. She said the President is in a secure location, the Vice President, and is in continuous contact, she said, with Vice President Cheney. She mentioned again that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon. Secretary of State Powell, she said, at an undisclosed location. She said she went
seeing happening before them. You see it here on the corner of 48th Street and 6th Avenue in New York City outside the Fox News Channel headquarters. We have seen this site in many locations. People just simply in shock at what they're seeing. Who could have thought that an attack of this magnitude would happen in the United States of America? We have had officials planning for such an attack for some time, but many ordinary citizens thought that something like this could never actually happen. So much security in place, so many times that defense officials and others have war-gamed this out and planned for an attack. But on this day, it has happened. No one able to figure out why, particularly September 11th, the year 2001. One person has mentioned that it was supposed to be tomorrow that an associate of Osama bin Laden was due to be sentenced in New York. And others have mentioned that they believe Osama bin Laden is perhaps the only terrorist with the kind of organization who could plan something this massive and this deadly. The United States government not confirming anything of the kind. The Afghan government, which has been accused of, for some years, of harboring Osama bin Laden, rushing to say that they have no knowledge of this and they condemn it. However, they have for years not given Osama bin Laden up to the United States, despite repeated requests from Washington. They are also saying that they do not believe Osama bin Laden is capable of this. There may be many in Washington who believe otherwise at this hour. We're waiting for more briefings to come in. Some planning at the Department of Defense. As you know, Secretary Rumsfeld is still there at this hour. Others with officials in New York City. We are going to bring those to you just as soon as they happen. They're going to be happening just sort of suddenly, and as they do, we're going to bring them to you here on the Fox News Channel.
There are a great number of survivors you can see being carted away. This from the lower Manhattan area, where our Rick Leventhal has been doing a great job of reporting all day. Rick is back with us now live and safe, we're happy to say. Rick, what's the latest there?
Well, John, one of the things that you did not hear from firefighter Bill Quick, who I was just speaking with a short time ago, is I asked him, after Karen Hughes' news conference began and we had to break away, I asked him about the number of rescue workers on the ground when that building collapsed, when the first tower collapsed. And he said, in fact, there were hundreds of rescue workers at the base of the building tending to people who had been injured by falling debris from when the planes hit, tending to people who had been hurt by rubble and were bleeding and dazed and wounded and disoriented, trying to help those people when that tower collapsed. And there is a growing concern that hundreds, possibly hundreds, of emergency rescue workers, police officers, firefighters, maybe some very high-ranking members of this city's fire department were killed in the debris that fell from the first of the two towers. After that first tower collapsed, people did clear out of the area very quickly. Some people did go back before that second tower collapsed, so it's possible people were killed in that one as well. But certainly, if there was a high death toll in terms of when the towers came down, it would have been after the first tower. We'll give you a look south on Church Street, where the efforts continue to try and put out the fires that still burn in what's left of the Twin Towers. We're told that one of the two buildings, there may be as many as 10 to 20 stories left standing. The other one, though, is a crater. It's virtually a hole in the ground. You might even be able to see, Adam, can you see the piece of the building? There's a piece of the building in the middle of Church Street. You can't see it right now because of the smoke and the haze, but we're going to, apparently, Rudy Giuliani is now speaking to the mayor of New York. Let's head back to the studio and to the mayor's press conference. Do we have the mayor?
We're attempting, Rick, to get the audio connections from the mayor.
And they handled themselves with bravery. They handled themselves with dignity. They handled themselves in a way that reduced the loss of life. We didn't have panic. We didn't have people running and hurting other people. The people of New York City really distinguished themselves. And I just want to say this once again. New York City is a lot stronger than this. And we're going to overcome it. And the people of New York City are going to give an example of how you stand up to terrorism. You just don't be afraid. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We need
5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York, there making another statement about the response of this city. Linda, I'd just like to say I've been in this chair now for about, well, it was just about exactly 7 hours ago that the first of these events started unfolding. What a calamitous day for America. And yet, you know that somewhere in the world, somebody is watching these pictures with great glee. watching the pictures of the hijacked airliner, the second one of the day, smashing into and ultimately demolishing the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, the symbol of capitalism to many people around the world. They want us to be scared. They want us to be afraid. As we heard President Bush's senior advisor say not long ago that our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today. They want us to somehow lose some of that freedom, and let's just hope and pray that that doesn't happen.
The United States most definitely will not allow it to happen. However, there will be a coordinated response, you can be sure. We are beginning to get more information about those who were lost today. The numbers in the end may be in the tens of thousands, but we know for sure the number of people who were lost on the 4 commercial airliners that went down today. They were 2 American Airlines planes, 2 United Airlines planes. In honor of those souls departed, let us remind you of who and how many were on those planes. American Airlines Flight 77, bound from Dulles, Virginia to Los Angeles, 77 passengers and 6 crew. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, 81 passengers and 11 crew. United Airlines from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, Flight 93, 38 passengers and 7 crew. Also, United Airlines Flight 175, bound from Boston to Los Angeles, 56 passengers and 9 crew. As we mentioned before, as we're beginning to learn more details about those who may have been on those planes, we here at Fox News have also learned that a friend and a colleague was lost on that airplane that crashed into the Pentagon. Her name is Barbara Olson, and you may have seen her many times on this network and others. Her husband is Ted Olson, also a famous face. He was nominated by the Bush administration to be Solicitor General, was heavily involved in the Bush administration effort during the contesting of the Florida vote during the presidential election. Barbara Olson made a phone call from that flight, apparently, before it crashed into the Pentagon. We have learned that she is presumed dead, and we say that with great sorrow. And we will learn, I'm sure, in the coming hours, many more people who we know, who you know, around America who were involved in these accidents and who may have been lost. There we see her picture. We're sorry to say goodbye to a friend and a colleague. We have been given some preliminary estimates about how many may have died in the World Trade Center attacks. According to Congressman Jim Moran, who was part of a briefing much earlier today, his first estimate that he was given was perhaps 10,000 people. Now, as we learned from World Trade Center officials, the buildings, the 2 skyscrapers, were at full capacity this morning when the 2 planes slammed into the towers. Full capacity means at least 50,000 people. It will take some time, many hours, if not days, before we can determine exactly how many people were lost in that attack. There is a coordinated response underway. It's called a federal response plan. 28 federal agencies involved. This is a plan that has been around for some years. It was updated last year after the Oklahoma City bombing, many years after the Oklahoma City bombing. And now, unfortunately, it has been put into place. The Justice Department leads it, basically. The FBI leads the investigation. But as you can imagine, all federal agencies, and all personnel involved with the federal agencies have all been called in for help. Federal Emergency Response Agency, FEMA, actively involved. They have now activated 8 urban search and response teams in New York City to search through the rubble that you have seen of the collapse of these towers on your screen. They're being activated and dispatched to search through the rubble for any survivors. The hospitals in New York City have been completely overwhelmed by the wounded. In fact, some of the wounded have now been evacuated across the river to New Jersey. Also, the hospitals in Connecticut on complete standby. The Pentagon is at the highest level of alert. It's something called ThreatCon Delta. Usually it's at ThreatCon Normal, but today was escalated to ThreatCon Delta as the Secretary of Defense continues to operate from that building, trying to coordinate what, if any, military response will be necessary. We do know a little more clarification from the Pentagon. Originally, we had been told that 2 aircraft carriers had been dispatched from Norfolk to come to the New York harbor. That apparently has been clarified. Those aircraft carriers have been sent out of their base for their own protection, but they are not being sent to the New York harbor. Other ships are being sent to the New York harbor. They have not been identified as of yet, but preliminarily we have been told that they are being sent here to help not only with protection, but also to help with a massive rescue response to the wounded. We bring in with me my colleague, John Gibson, who's going to be joining us for the next several hours in our coverage. John.
Amazing job you and John Scott have done. This is a national disaster and a national tragedy, and I think the country now moved forward on 2 levels immediately, or 3. The huge rescue effort that's going to go on down at the World Trade Center, as many as 10,000 an estimate. 50,000 people were in the building at the time those planes hit it. No one knows exactly how many people may have survived the collapse of those buildings or lie there dead, as well as the hundreds of fire workers and police workers who were at the base of the building. Our own Dan Cohen was there as 2 of them. The first one collapsed, and Dan was helping triage people, and moved to the second one, and it collapsed on top of them. And as Linda mentioned just a while ago, perhaps the first face on this national tragedy is Barbara Olson, 46 years old, who's appeared on this network many times in various political discussions at the trade tower this morning. As more faces are placed with the statistics. In addition, there is a question, as Linda was talking with Larry Korb earlier, how did this happen and who do we blame? Certainly one of the areas that somebody's got to look at is who's flying these planes? Does anybody really think an American pilot was at the yoke flying them into the trade towers? Or was someone trained to fly heavy jets and fly them into the World Trade Center? And if they were trained, who trained them? In what countries? And are those countries to blame for training people to fly these planes to then carry out these attacks on the United States? Certainly there are many countries in the Middle East who don't like us, who fly heavy jets, who have to train people. Iran does. Syria does. Iraq does. All of them are potential candidates for who trained these pilots. We're going now to a NATO press conference on the effects of this attack. This would probably be going on at The Hague?
Actually, this is in Brussels. They have actually evacuated the building there, but the leaders are standing by. They just finished a meeting. Let's listen.
A defence and security organisation, which remains alert, and I can assure you remains resolute and determined as well.
Laurent Zecchini, Le Monde. Lord Robertson, I'd like to repeat one of the questions. The fact that the Pentagon, the headquarters of the American defense, has been hit, do you consider it as a sort of an act of war or not?
Well, I'm not in a position to make decisions about what is an act of war. An act of unspeakable violence took place today. And this is a moment where people are reflecting on the nature of that tragedy and standing firm against that kind of violence and with the people who have suffered from it. What happens thereafter about it will be a matter for alliance consultation, but I don't think that it would be right or proper to jump to any judgments this evening.
I'll take 2 more questions. Gentleman in the back, please.
Secretary General, do you consider Article 5 to be in application also for terrorist attack or only for state attack?
Well, that is a matter that was considered and deliberated upon at the Washington summit 2 years ago, and you will be able to get from your files what the communique of that summit meeting said on this specific issue. But I'm not willing to go into any of these areas this evening.
This will be the last question, please.
Angus Roxburgh, BBC News. Do you have any initial thoughts about who might lie behind these acts of terrorism?
The Americans don't know, we don't know. But the clear message to whoever it was is that they will have left a trail behind them. And they can be assured that they will be found. And the international community, the whole international community, will be united in condemning what they've done and making sure that they're not in a position to do it again.
Thank you very much. It will be all.
The message from NATO, obviously, that they are all standing strong and together with the United States, trying to figure out exactly what has happened. It's very early on, obviously. They can't coordinate any sort of NATO response until they figure out with some fair degree of clarity who is responsible for this. But nevertheless, NATO, they're saying it stands with the United States, even as they have evacuated their own personnel from the NATO headquarters in Brussels. We have with us on the phone former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger. He served in the Bush administration. He's actually with us from Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm sorry about that. Mr. Eagleburger, we thank you very much for being with us. Your first thoughts as to who might be capable of coordinating this massive terrorist attack?
Well, you have to start out with the normal conventional wisdom, which is Osama bin Laden. The point being, I think it's now very clear that this took tremendous planning. It was, in its own way, brilliantly done. The timing was perfect. They did everything very, very professionally. It took money, it took training, it took time, and you have to ask yourself, who is capable of that? And you start out with Osama bin Laden. We may never know for sure. What we do know is that terrorism in its starkest form has attacked this country now, and I do think it is as close to an act of war as you can get in this sort of a situation.
Mr. Eagleburger, if you would stand by for just one moment. We have just gotten the first footage of that commercial airline crash in Pennsylvania. It was just about 80 miles from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The first reports were that this is the plane that was part of the coordinated attack. This plane was supposed to be commandeered toward Camp David. Camp David, of course, being the retreat of the President of the United States. It never made it there. It crashed in Pennsylvania, 80 miles from Pittsburgh. However, there was a significant loss of life there. Back to you, Mr. Eagleburger. We thank you once again for being with us. Now, explain to us how the White House, the State Department, the Pentagon, and others work together to formulate a response, not only in terms of triage and rescue, but then a more coordinated political response.
Well, first of all, I think we've seen that the planning that's gone on some years now in advance of this event has been put into effect. The President's now in Omaha, for example. So all of this is, I think, clearly based on earlier plans, and they seem to be working quite well. The President obviously now is talking with his principal advisors, although Secretary Powell isn't back from Peru yet. And I'm sure they are now going over the various options of how to deal with this. I think you have to put it in several pieces. First of all, what do we do now to pick up the pieces from this? What do we do to try to begin to find out who did it? What can we learn from this that we will make it possible to prevent these things in the future? That's one whole set of activities that will be carried on. Beyond that, there's the whole question of what do we do in terms of retaliation? What is there that's available in terms of military potential if we decide to do anything? Who should the people be that we look to, that we may want to take some action against? All of this will take time. All of it will take some coordination. But I think there are a whole series of different questions. The one I don't understand, by the way, I can understand intelligence not being able to catch the fact that this whole event was to take place. What I do not understand is how you can hijack aircraft in the United States anymore. I thought we had that licked.
Yeah,
I thought we knew how to deal with that, but it's fairly clear now that one way or another, this is a total failure. And in fact, if we had prevented these hijackings, the rest of this couldn't have taken place. And that's where I think we need to begin to look very hard at what we do and how we do it to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Right, as it was not just one aircraft that was hijacked, but four.
I simply don't understand it. We have always thought for some years now that we knew how to handle this potential hijackers. Whether it was just sloppy procedure or what it was, I don't know. But it certainly cannot happen again.
Mr. Eagleburger, if you would just hang on a second. Joining us on the phone now is Hassan Rahman, who is the Chief Representative in the United States of the Palestinian Authority. Mr. Rahman, we saw pictures this morning from Palestinian towns and villages in the West Bank of Palestinians celebrating this event. Is this a cause for Palestinians to celebrate?
Oh, absolutely not. It's a day of sadness. We are in deep shock. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this cowardly act against the United States and against the American installations. And absolutely, we in fact believe that the perpetrators of this horrible act should be brought to justice wherever they are.
Mr. Rahman, why should Americans believe you? Why should Americans not believe that The Taliban are saying, oh, how awful, that the Palestinians are saying, oh, how awful, because now that this successful terrorism has been carried out, someone is going to pay.
Well, first of all, why should not they believe me, to start with?
Well, I'm looking at the pictures of your people celebrating.
Well, it's not my people. There are a few kids in the streets who are angry at the Israelis, but they do not understand what had happened in the United States. Those cannot be representative neither of the Palestinian people at large nor of the Palestinian Authority. So we should not really misconstrue the reaction of a few teenagers in the street of Ramallah under siege with the position of the Palestinian people and how we feel in the Palestinian Authority.
Who do you think is a good candidate to look at for the responsibility for these acts?
I think it would be irresponsible from my side or anyone else to speculate at this point. There are American intelligence agencies who are involved in the investigation, and it is only prudent from all of us, and especially from the media, not to speculate and wait until we have sufficient evidence as to who are the perpetrators of this horrible act are.
Can you say, sir, that absolutely there is no Palestinian involvement in these terrorist attacks whatsoever?
I will say that absolutely there's no involvement of the Palestinian Authority or the PLO. Excuse me, I cannot say who is behind this, whoever it is, whether it is Palestinian, American, Latino, Chinese, Indian, Jewish, they should be condemned in the strongest possible terms, and they should be brought to justice.
You can understand how offensive many Americans find the footage of these Palestinians in the West Bank. They're celebrating and passing out candy and cheering and showing victory.
I find it offensive myself too, but what can you do? Those are young teenagers. I saw them on CNN, and we should not take them as representatives of the Palestinian people. There are 7 million Palestinians around. What you saw is about 50 or 60 Palestinian teenagers or young guys in the streets who are angry at the Israelis.
Mr. Rahman, who anywhere in the world, in your mind, has such a large grudge against the United States that they would want to carry out such an act?
Again, as I said, it would be very imprudent for me and irresponsible to try to speculate at this point.
Okay, but can you say definitively that there is no Palestinian organization that at least that I want to put a finer point on it, that even has the kind of sophisticated coordination and planning and perhaps even weaponry to coordinate something that is...
Listen, I would say that President Arafat made a statement to that effect. All the Palestinian organizations did the same thing, including Hamas and others. So I have no reason to believe that there is Palestinian involvement in it. And as I said, whoever is responsible, whether it is Palestinian, American, Jewish, Christian, Hindus, they should be punished for this crime.
Mr. Rahman, if you wouldn't mind hanging on just a second. Mr. Eagleberger, you've heard Mr. Rahman. Do you believe that the protestations and the quick statements to avoid blame are to be believed from the Taliban or the Palestinians or anybody?
Well, I think you have to parse it out. First of all, we all know perfectly well that the Taliban has been housing and comforting Osama bin Laden for years. Whether they had anything to do with this immediate event or not, the fact of the matter is they're responsible for having mothered him.